Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
The Major's announcement caused a storm of complex emotions to rise within Leo. He did not wish to kill Felix, not after everything they had endured together over the past few hours. But the rules of the second round were brutally clear. Out of each pair, only one could move forward, while the other had to die. There was no room for compromise, no option for mercy. As Leo stood in the pristine, glass-walled enclosure, his hand gripping the dagger at his side, the echoes of violence all around him only heightened his unease. Many of the other pairs had already begun fighting without hesitation. The sounds of metal clashing, anguished screams, and frenzied shouting reverberated through the sterile room, a grim reminder of what was expected of him. But Leo didn't move. Something about attacking Felix felt innately wrong to him. Although he hadn't known Felix for long, and while he wouldn't go so far as to call him a friend, Felix was not his enemy. He was a man who had stood beside him in chaos, and killing him felt like betrayal. "We don't have to do this, you know," Felix said suddenly, his voice trembling as he backed toward the far wall of the enclosure. His eyes darted nervously around, but his focus always returned to Leo. "We could just wait. Let the timer run out. Both of us get disqualified, but at least we'll still be alive. Doesn't that sound better than killing each other?" Leo didn't answer. He lowered his gaze to the dagger in his hand, its edge gleaming under the artificial lights. His expression was hollow, his thoughts swirling. The Academy's rules were absolute, but Felix's suggestion brought an unwelcome question to the forefront of Leo's mind. Would they really let us walk away if we don't fight? Or would they just kill us both? The thought gnawed at him, burrowing deeper with each passing second. He couldn't shake the sense that the Academy's ruthlessness extended far beyond what they'd already experienced, and that they could easily break their word and kill them both instead of letting them walk off. But even more troubling than that was another, far more personal question. If I don't fight, if I don't win, will I ever get my memories back? The letter he had received before all of this had been clear. His only path to reclaiming his past lay within the Academy. Walking away would mean abandoning the only chance he had to uncover who he truly was. The weight of that realization pressed down on him like a physical force, and his grip on the dagger tightened even more. Conflicting emotions warred within him. Doubt, guilt, fear, and his hollow expression turned further dazed. However, just when he found himself buried within a deep pool of indecision, a cold, primal voice whispered in the depths of his consciousness. Kill. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't even an urge. It was a truth, raw and undeniable. To survive, to move forward, he would have to kill. The timer on the wall ticked steadily downward, each passing second feeling like a countdown to the inevitable. Felix, growing more desperate with Leo's silence, took a tentative step forward, his hands raised as if to placate him. "Say something, damn it. You're scaring me," Felix blurted out, his voice cracking under the weight of his panic, as Leo finally lifted his gaze to meet him. "In 20 seconds, I'm going to attack you, Felix," Leo said in a cold, emotionless voice, his tone sounding steady and even. Felix's mouth fell open in shock, but Leo continued without pause. "I don't particularly want you dead, but I'm not going to hold back, so I suggest you try your best to kill me too." The words landed like a hammer blow. They were devoid of malice, but that only made them hit harder. Felix stumbled back, his breathing ragged. "What?" he croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You can't. You know I can't fight without my alcohol, man. This isn't a fair fight. Please don't do this." Felix's voice grew louder, more frantic, as tears began streaming down his face. "I'll do anything, Leo. Anything. Just don't kill me." But Leo's expression didn't change. His resolve was unshaken, his focus elsewhere. He adjusted his grip on the dagger, shifting his stance slightly as his body tensed. Felix's voice cracked, the raw desperation in his words spilling out like a dam breaking. "We survived together, man. We were a team. How can you just throw that away?" Leo didn't respond. He didn't flinch. His mind was consumed by the single, undeniable truth. This was the only way forward. "Time's up," he said quietly, his voice cutting through Felix's sobs like a blade. And then he moved. Leo lunged forward, his dagger aimed directly at Felix's chest. Felix screamed, his eyes wide with terror as he scrambled to defend himself. His arms flailed uselessly, the tears in his eyes blurring his vision and his movements clumsy, uncoordinated. For a brief moment, their eyes met, Leo's cold and unyielding, Felix's filled with panic and betrayal. And in that instant, the fragile bond they had shared as partners shattered completely. As Felix looked into Leo's eyes now, he no longer saw the kind teammate who had picked him out of a crowd of ruthless assassins, but instead saw a murderer hell-bent on ending his life. Stab! Slash! The fight was over before it ever began, as Leo slit his throat and stabbed his heart in the most painless way he knew. "Forgive me for this, big guy. I did not wish for it to end this way," Leo said, as those were the last words that Felix heard before his eyes went dark forever. Leo's heart throbbed violently in his chest as he waited for the wave of guilt to wash over him, but it never came. After brutally murdering his teammate, Leo had expected to feel ashamed, even disgusted by his actions, but instead, a strange sense of satisfaction settled over him. "What's wrong with me? What sort of monster am I?" The thoughts circled in his mind as he stared at the blood smeared across his arms in confusion. Did your companionship mean nothing to me? Leo wondered, looking at the dead body of Felix at his feet. Yet no matter how hard he tried to summon some remorse, he couldn't find any. There wasn't even a flicker of regret within him, only a hollow void where his humanity should have been. "Yep, I'm a stone-cold killer. As bad, if not even worse than the others here. Maybe I do belong in this place," Leo muttered lightly, as despite losing his memories, he felt assured of his identity as a killer after this incident. He instinctively knew where exactly to target a man to pierce their heart, and also knew the precise method to slit one's throat to cause one minimal pain, but instant death. These were moves deep-seated in his bones, and the ease with which he performed them told him all he needed to know about himself. He was an assassin, a merchant of death. I did give him a chance to fight back. I gave him 20 seconds and charged from the front. As far as I am concerned, everything from that point onwards was fair, Leo mouthed, as he realized the reasoning behind why he felt no remorse. Introspecting, he felt as if by giving Felix the warning before he came at him, Leo had absolved himself of all blame. Whatever came next was simply fate, and if Felix had the spine to fight back, he could have perhaps survived. It wasn't Leo's fault that he was such a coward while sober, and hence he could not carry the burden of his death on his shoulders. "Monster. Leo Skyshard, you're a monster. But it's okay, at least you are not a dirty monster," Leo concluded, as he sat cross-legged beside Felix's body, waiting for the second round of tests to end. 18 minutes later. 18 minutes later, as the timer on the wall turned to midnight, all the glass wall restrictions were lifted simultaneously. A section of the pristine white walls of the room shimmered and dissolved, revealing a hidden door through which medics flooded into the room. Healers worked swiftly, casting spells and applying potions to stabilize the victors, their practiced hands moving with urgency. Meanwhile, the defeated were carried away on stretchers, their lifeless bodies treated with a cold efficiency as they were tossed onto loading racks like sacks of potatoes. Leo remained seated on his tile, watching the scene unfold with a detached gaze, until a kind-looking healer approached him, holding out a vial of shimmering green liquid. "For your stamina," the healer said, his tone brisk and kind, as Leo accepted the potion without a word. Pop! Uncorking the potion, Leo took a cautious sip, the liquid burning his tongue and throat slightly as it made way down to his stomach. Delicious, he thought, as the potion worked its magic instantly. A wave of warmth coursed through his body, pushing back the fatigue that had settled deep in his bones. However, just as he tilted the vial to drink more, the sound of heavy boots clicking against the tiled floor drew his attention. The medics around him straightened, their movements slowing as the major entered the room, flanked by a small group of military personnel. The major's entry instantly drew everyone's attention, as the survivors worried whether or not there was a secret round 3 waiting for them at the end of the major's speech. Fortunately, though, it did not seem to be the case, for the major began his speech by congratulating all for finally making it into the academy. "Congratulations," the major said, his voice sharp and unwavering. "You've proven your worth. Out of the hundreds of thousands who applied, you are the 125 individuals who have earned the right to join our prestigious assassin wing of the Rodova Military Academy. You've endured trials that tested your strength, your instincts, and your resolve. You've made sacrifices, some harder than others. But let me make one thing clear. This was only the beginning." The major said, his tone sounding congratulatory but also ominous. Outside this chamber, the major continued, gesturing toward the newly revealed exit door. "Transport ships are waiting to take each of you to the academy grounds. There, you will receive your student identification badges and the official academy robes. These are not just ceremonial garments. They mark you as a part of the elite." The mention of robes and badges elicited a few murmurs among the survivors, but most remained quiet, too drained to do much more than listen. The major's gaze swept across the room, landing briefly on Leo and then moving on. "Tomorrow, the aptitude testing and orientation will begin. Every one of you is expected to attend, dressed in your academy robes and nothing else. Failure to comply will result in immediate expulsion." Leo's brow furrowed slightly at the last statement. He had not even officially entered the academy, and yet there were threats of expulsion already being made. Even now, there seemed to be no room for error. Once the major left the room, Leo briskly rose to his feet and made his way toward the exit. Unlike many of the others still receiving medical treatment, he required little medical attention. The potion he had been given had already done its job, restoring his stamina and dulling the lingering aches in his muscles. Stepping through the doorway, he entered a long corridor where a series of temporary counters had been set up. Behind each one, military officers sat with an air of rigid efficiency, their expressions unreadable as they processed the new recruits. A few students had already formed lines at the counters, some moving sluggishly from exhaustion, while others carried themselves with tense awareness, still wary despite the ordeal being over. The hum of quiet conversation filled the space, but no one dared to speak too loudly. Leo scanned the area and made his way toward an unoccupied counter, where a middle-aged officer with graying hair sat with a thick ledger in front of him. The man barely looked up as Leo approached. "Name?" the officer asked, his tone brisk and to the point. "Leo." Leo responded without hesitation. The officer ran his finger down the list of names, stopping when he found what he was looking for. With a short nod, he reached beneath the counter and pulled out a neatly arranged tray. Leo's eyes immediately flicked to its contents. At the top of the tray were 2 folded sets of military-issue uniforms. The fabric was durable, the stitching precise, with the rank of private emblazoned on the chest. Unlike the familiar green camouflage patterns he would have expected for military attire, these uniforms bore a distinct gray camouflage design, a muted color scheme clearly meant for blending into urban environments rather than dense forests. His gaze trailed across the insignia above the breast pocket. Stitched in bold letters over the Academy's crest were the words, "Assassin Branch." Leo's fingers hovered over the material for a moment, then shifted to the second set of attire in the tray. It was different from the first, jet black, lightweight, and flowing. A set of robes specifically designed for assassin combat practice. Standard issue uniform, the officer explained in a monotonous voice. To be worn daily for academic sessions. The black ones are combat robes for practical courses. Use them as instructed. Leo gave a slight nod, picking up the last item in the tray, a small but finely crafted identity token. It was a badge of solid metal, surprisingly heavy for its size. Engraved across its polished surface were the words, "Leo Skyshard, Rodova Military Academy." Although Leo did not yet fully understand the significance of this token, something told him it would be more than just a student identification. In a world where strength dictated status, having proof of his place in the academy would likely open doors he had yet to even consider. For now, however, he simply took what was given, nodding silently as he stepped away from the counter, his mind already shifting to what lay ahead. Walking briskly, he reached the hangar area where modern transport ships were waiting to taxi students to their new home. Once enough students for a trip gathered, they quickly loaded them onto the ship, flying off to the fabled Rodova Military Academy. The aerial trip to the academy was a short one, lasting barely 15 minutes. However, the distance covered was undoubtedly significant. Leo was certain he had watched them cross an entire ocean based on the view outside his window. From above, the stark contrast between where he had been and where he was headed became increasingly clear. The prison test area had been a secluded island, surrounded by nothing but dense jungles and unrelenting wilderness. Isolated and forgotten, its only purpose was to serve as a battleground for those desperate enough to seek entry into the academy. But the actual Rodova Military Academy was nothing like that. As the ship neared its destination, the rugged, untamed greenery of the island gave way to the sprawling heart of civilization. A vast metropolis stretched in all directions, with towering skyscrapers casting long shadows over the bustling streets below. Massive digital billboards flickered with advertisements, displaying faces Leo didn't recognize. Famous influencers, celebrities, and warriors, each plastered with bold text promoting cosmetic products, genetic enhancements, weapons, or military services. The roads were packed with sleek, high-speed vehicles weaving between buildings of varying sizes. Some rolled on the roads below, while others flew haphazardly in the sky, just like the flying capsule he was in. Leo, despite his usual indifference, found himself captivated by the view. The sunrise behind the city's skyline bathed the entire city in a brilliant glow, setting the streets ablaze with hues of crimson and gold. For a moment, he simply observed, appreciating the surreal beauty of it all. Then his eyes landed on the true centerpiece of the city, Rodova Military Academy. Even in a metropolis filled with architectural marvels, the academy stood out as a titan among them. It was colossal, a fortress in every sense of the word. Its sheer size dwarfed every surrounding structure, making even the tallest skyscrapers look insignificant in comparison. Massive walls surrounded the academy grounds, lined with turrets, security checkpoints, and watchtowers manned by heavily armed personnel. The buildings within the compound were monolithic, constructed with reinforced metal and cutting-edge materials that reflected a sense of absolute power. Leo knew little about urban planning or real estate, but even he understood what this meant. In a city as packed as this one, to have an academy this large in the heart of it meant that the real estate of the academy alone was worth a fortune. No ordinary academy could afford such luxury, and if the Rodova Military Academy stood at such a location, then it was bound to be a special place. The transport capsule carrying Leo descended smoothly, its thrusters emitting a low hum as it approached the academy grounds. With practiced precision, the vessel touched down, sending a faint tremor through the floor beneath Leo's feet. A mechanical chime followed, signaling the completion of the landing sequence. A moment later, the capsule doors released with a pressurized hiss, sliding open to reveal the world beyond. A rush of crisp air filtered in, carrying with it the cold of the environment. Leo took a steady breath before stepping forward. As he exited, the first thing that caught his attention was the sheer scale of the open ground around him. From the air, he could discern that the Rodova Military Academy was built like a fort and was massive in size. However, it was only after landing that he realized just how massive it really was. The training grounds stretched around him for as far as the eye could see, and although they felt vast and wide, they looked tiny in comparison to the academy walls that towered at a massive 150 feet in height. The walls of the academy were made from reddish-black bricks, and from the top of the walls hung massive black banners, each one adorned with bold, silver lettering that read, Rodova Military Academy. The banners swayed gently in the wind, their thick, reinforced fabric giving them an imposing presence rather than a decorative one. They weren't made of any ordinary cloth, and even from a distance, Leo could tell that they were crafted from durable, high-quality material, resistant to both the elements and time itself. The silver lettering on the banners gleamed under the morning sun, giving any onlooker the chills. The environment of the academy screamed that this wasn't just a place of learning. It was a legacy, and as Leo looked around, even he felt intimidated by the place's vibes and history. A subtle chill ran down his spine, not from fear, but from the realization of what he had stepped into. This academy was not just a school. It was a proving ground, and only those worthy could graduate from this place at the end. Freshmen, this way. A sharp, authoritative voice cut through the morning air as a female military instructor stood at the front of the gathered recruits. Her posture was rigid, her expression unreadable as she gestured for the new students to follow. Clutching his newly issued academy robes, uniform, and identity token, Leo fell in line with the others, his anxious eyes surveying the surroundings as he looked for any signal from his mysterious letter issuer that could give him a clue on how to regain his memories now that he was inside the academy. Unfortunately, however, there was no external contact made yet, forcing him to follow the others as normal. The instructor wasted no time. As they passed various buildings, she spoke in clipped, efficient sentences, giving a rapid rundown of the academy's key facilities. "This is the administration office," she stated, nodding toward a sleek, modern building lined with reinforced windows. "If you have any issues in your first few days, housing problems, uniform replacements, or paperwork, handle it here. However, don't expect hand-holding. This is a military institution, not a daycare." Leo barely spared the office more than a glance, noting its location in case he needed anything. The group marched further along a paved road, their boots clacking against the stone as the instructor gestured toward a large, open structure with a domed ceiling. "This is the orientation hall. You will all report here tomorrow at exactly 7 o'clock hours. Sharp, in uniform. If you're late, you may as well turn around and walk off campus because you won't be setting foot in the testing hall." Her voice carried the weight of absolute authority, and though she didn't raise her tone, the underlying threat in her words was crystal clear. Leo took note. No margin for error. Noted. They moved past another large building, this one distinctly different from the rest, wider, lower, and filled with the tantalizing scent of food. "Mess hall," the instructor said plainly. 3 meals a day. The schedule is posted inside. If you miss a meal, that's your problem. Leo caught a few recruits casting longing glances toward the building. He supposed some of them hadn't eaten in a while. He himself didn't feel particularly hungry, though he knew he'd have to refuel soon. They continued deeper into the academy grounds, passing rows of identical dormitory buildings, each clearly designated for different student years. "These are the second-year dorms. Steer clear of here unless you want to be bullied." Finally, they reached the last row of buildings, positioned slightly apart from the others. "These," the instructor said, stopping in her tracks, "are the first-year dormitories where you lot will be staying." She turned to face them, arms crossed over her chest. "Find your names on the soft board by the entrance. It will list your assigned rooms. Don't bother complaining about your placements. They've been decided already." Some recruits exchanged wary glances. Then, as if sensing their concerns, the instructor added, "And before any of you ask, no, you will not be sharing rooms. Assassins live in private lodgings. We don't want you killing each other in your sleep." Leo's brow twitched slightly at the bluntness of her statement, but he supposed it made sense. "So be glad you'll all be living separately, enjoying private bathrooms, as individuals from the other professions will not enjoy this luxury and will be forced to share bathrooms with sweaty roommates," she finished, her cold gaze sweeping across the recruits. "If you have any last questions, I suggest you figure them out yourselves." Dismissed. And with that, she turned on her heel and strode off, leaving the new students to their own devices. However, as she passed Leo, she purposefully slowed, just for a fraction of a second, barely enough to be noticed. Her sharp gaze flickered toward him, as the duo made the briefest of eye contact before she continued walking as if nothing had happened. Leo barely had time to process it before he felt something foreign pressed against his palm, a light but unmistakable texture, coarse yet flexible. Paper. His fingers curled around it instinctively before anyone else could notice, his eyes widening in surprise. The instructor did not look back. She walked away without another word, leaving Leo standing among his peers with a silent mystery now resting in his grasp. How did she even slip me the note? I'm sure she didn't so much as touch me, Leo thought, his eyes widening in surprise. The realization unsettled him. He had been hyper-aware of his surroundings, trained to notice even the smallest details, and yet the note had appeared in his hand undetected. His mind retraced the exchange, the instructor's sharp gaze lingering on him for just a fraction of a second longer than necessary, the deliberate way she had walked past without breaking stride. But no matter how hard he tried to recall, he couldn't pinpoint any obvious movement, no subtle shift or sleight of hand that could explain it. Yet, somehow, she had planted the note on him without his knowledge. She's skilled, Leo admitted, suppressing a frown. If she could slip something into his palm this easily, she could just as effortlessly have planted a dagger between his ribs. A chill ran through him. I'm too weak. The thought sat heavy in his chest. For all his instincts and reflexes, he had been completely outmaneuvered. Who was she? He tried to recall her name, but failed. She had never introduced herself, nor had he managed to glimpse her name tag. Yet, her appearance was etched into his memory with perfect clarity. She was tall for a woman, at least 5 feet 10 inches, with an athletic frame sculpted from years of combat training. Her jet black hair was cut just above her shoulders, neatly tucked behind her ears. High cheekbones and a sharp jawline gave her a striking, almost severe look, while her light olive skin was smooth and unblemished. Unusual, considering the brutal nature of military life. There was nothing overly distinctive about her. No visible scars, no features that immediately stood out. And yet, something about her presence made her impossible to ignore. Leo exhaled sharply, pushing the thoughts aside. If she's an instructor here, I'll see her again soon enough. For now, it was best to focus on what was in front of him. A quick glance around showed the other recruits already preoccupied with finding their rooms, too absorbed in their own concerns to notice him lingering. Realizing he had been standing still for too long, Leo turned toward the softboard displaying the dormitory assignments and scanned the list quickly. Leo Skyshard, room 316. Memorizing the number, he turned away and made his way toward his room. His fingers curled slightly around the note in his palm. As soon as he was alone, he planned to finally read it. Dormitory 316. The first-year housing within the Rodova Military Academy was simple yet elegant. There was no excess luxury, no unnecessary embellishments, just an efficient, well-designed space meant to accommodate students without distractions. As Leo stepped inside, the door slid shut behind him with a soft click. The room was spacious enough for a single occupant, neither too large nor too cramped. The walls were a muted gray, the flooring sleek and well-polished, reflecting the Academy's minimalist, military design. Against the far wall sat a sturdy bed, neatly made with crisp black sheets and a firm mattress. Adjacent to it was a small but functional desk, its surface bare except for a built-in terminal, likely meant for accessing Academy resources and coursework. To the left, a tall wardrobe stood, its doors slightly ajar to reveal space for the storage of Academy-issued uniforms and personal belongings. A separate compartment seemed designated for weapons storage, reinforcing the reality that this was not a typical school dormitory. At the back of the room, a private bathroom was tucked neatly into the layout. A quick glance inside revealed a sleek shower, a simple sink, and a mirror mounted above it. Efficient and to the point, just like everything else in the Academy. Leo set his belongings down on the desk and exhaled slowly. The tension from the day's trials still lingered in his muscles, but now, for the first time, he was truly alone. His gaze shifted to the note still clutched in his palm, as without wasting another second, he pulled out the small piece of paper, unfolded it, and began to read. First of all, congratulations on making it into the Rodova Military Academy. I am certain that the entrance test was no easy feat, especially considering how you have forgotten most of your abilities. Leo's frown deepened. He didn't care for flattery. Whoever had written this letter knew exactly what had happened to him, knew that his memory loss wasn't natural, but intentional. And yet, they spoke as though it were some minor inconvenience. The words felt hollow, calculated. However, I had faith that you would pull through, for you are what one could describe as a generational talent. Leo exhaled sharply through his nose. He hated this type of praise, the kind that felt more like manipulation than admiration. Generational talent? That meant nothing to him. If he truly was such a prodigy, then why had he felt so lost in the entrance test? Why did every fight leave him doubting his own instincts? The letter continued, and as his eyes moved down the page, his discomfort only grew. Tomorrow, you will undergo aptitude testing, during which your background will be assessed. It is then that you will come to appreciate the loss of your memory. Leo's grip on the paper tightened slightly. So, his past was something dangerous? Something that couldn't withstand scrutiny? Memorize the symbol I have drawn at the bottom of this note and present it to the instructor at the appropriate time. Do not ask questions. Just do it. His gaze flicked to the bottom of the page. A symbol was etched there, intricate yet unfamiliar. It resembled an interwoven set of geometric lines, forming a crest-like emblem. Leo felt no good vibes from this. Every instinct told him that whoever wrote this was toying with him, feeding him just enough information to keep him on a leash. I know you are eager to regain your memories, but now is not the correct time for you to recall them. Your memories will be returned to you when the time is right. For now, your focus should be on performing well within the academy. Leo's jaw clenched as anger slowly bubbled up inside him. His fingers curled, the edges of the note crinkling under his grip. Someone was controlling him, deciding what he could and couldn't know, dangling his own past in front of him like bait. He hated it, and yet, he knew he had no other choice but to comply with the manipulator's whims for now. The principal of Rodova Military Academy, retired General Auric Dainhart, sat behind his desk, skimming through the latest intake reports with a calm, impassive gaze. As a former Universal Government general, Dainhart was a man of discipline and experience. Though in his 60s, he remained as imposing as ever, with broad shoulders, neatly combed gray hair, and deep blue eyes. His years on the battlefield had earned him scars, but it was his mind, not his body, that made him truly formidable. He was a strategist first, a leader second, and a bureaucrat only because necessity demanded it. Knock, knock. A crisp knock at the door broke his focus. Enter, he said without looking up. The door slid open, and Major Silver Page stepped in, his posture straight as he saluted. Sir. Dainhart glanced at him before setting the report aside. Major, Auric acknowledged, before continuing with his question. What do you think about this year's batch of recruits? Major Page lowered his salute and took a step forward. This year's batch seems to be the best in the past 5 years, with some really strong talents popping up. The Sioux clan's representative this year is promising. His foundation is rock solid, and his mana control is leagues above the average first year. If he continues at this pace, he could be a prime candidate for the representing the first years at the inter-school championships. Dainhart hummed in acknowledgement, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. And the rest. There are a few standouts, Page admitted. A sword wielder from the Dracos line, a sniper from Erevan's family, and a poison elementalist with a rare dual affinity. All of them have good potential. Auric showed no visible joy at this report, but nodded curtly to acknowledge the information. We have some promising talents in the swordsmanship, archery, and magecraft divisions as well. However, none seem to show potential for complete genetic awakening. In a way, it's good news, for we don't have to worry about raising the next dragon candidate. However, it's also a shame, for without a truly top-tier talent, Reclaiming the Inter-School Cup from Genova Military Academy will be difficult, Auric said as he let out a deep sigh. For the past 15 years, Rodova Military Academy had been chasing the top spot in the Universal School rankings, only to fall just short every single time. Genova Military Academy had cemented itself as the #1 military institution in the galaxy, consistently producing warriors that surpassed their peers. And while Rodova had held its ground, it had been stuck in the frustrating position of second best. In the grand scheme, second place was no failure. Rodova was still one of the most revered institutions in the universe. But prestige wasn't just about ranking. The Academy's funding, political influence, and ability to attract top-tier talents all suffered from its inability to dethrone Genova. Donors funneled resources toward the reigning champion, and the best young warriors naturally gravitated toward the school that held the crown. For years, Rodova had tried every possible strategy, improving their training regimens, hiring the best instructors, and even expanding their scouting networks. But none of it mattered unless a standout talent emerged, someone who could defy the odds and turn the tide. And so far, this year's batch, while impressive, didn't seem to have that one talent capable of changing everything. "Any security threats this year, sir?" Paige asked, shifting the conversation to a more pressing concern. Danehart glanced at him before leaning back slightly in his chair. "Nothing out of the ordinary, but there are a few suspected evil cult sympathizers trying to slip through," he admitted, his tone carrying a note of irritation. Paige's expression darkened. The evil cult, as the universal government had branded them, remained one of the greatest threats to law and order in the universe. It was no secret that they actively sought to infiltrate government institutions, planting brainwashed young talents within their ranks to destabilize both the universal government and the great clans from within. This was precisely why every government-aligned institution, especially military academies, enforced rigorous background checks before admitting students. For a military academy, allowing an evil cult sympathizer to slip through was more than a simple failure. It was the worst possible lapse in judgment. They were a cancer, spreading insidiously, poisoning minds with heresy and rebellion. But, Danehart continued, his voice unwavering, tomorrow's aptitude testing will sort them out. A slight smirk tugged at the edge of his lips. For no one can evade the background check. After securing his uniform in the wall-mounted storage cabinet and disposing of the mysterious note safely in his bathroom, Leo stepped out of his dormitory, his stomach finally reminding him of how long it had been since he last ate. The trials of the entrance exam and the second round had left little time to think about meals, but now, hunger settled in like a dull ache. The mess hall wasn't far, just a short walk from the dormitories, and not wanting to stay hungry for too long, Leo decided to make a trip. Mess hall timings: breakfast, 6 to 8:30. Lunch, 12 to 1400 hours. Dinner, 19 to 2100 hours. Just outside the mess hall, the service timings had been posted, and seeing how lunch hour had just begun, Leo felt relieved that he hadn't missed his window. Pushing open the heavy cafeteria doors, he stepped inside, immediately greeted by the scent of hot food and the low murmur of scattered conversations. The hall was spacious, militaristic in design, with long metallic tables lined in organized rows. The food was served buffet style, with recruits moving down the line with metal trays, picking what they needed. Leo joined the queue, his hungry eyes glancing over every lunch option available. He expected to not be able to recognize the food that was being served. However, the options presented were pretty basic and easy to understand. There was meat, vegetables, fruits, and some side dishes, and although he did not exactly understand what sort of meat or fruit was being given, he decided to pick it up as long as it smelled okay. The meal was nutritionally optimized, clearly designed to sustain warriors in training. Each plate had a precisely balanced portion of proteins, carbohydrates, and fiber, as the academy seemed to favor function over taste, but the food still looked edible, or at least better than standard military rations. His tray held a serving of grilled meat, seasoned lightly but cooked to perfection, steamed vegetables, their color vibrant, likely providing the necessary vitamins, a dense grain-based side, resembling brown rice or something similar. A small protein bar, wrapped and placed on the side for additional sustenance. A flask of nutrient-rich water, meant to keep hydration levels up. A flask of stamina regeneration water, meant to restore stamina. A flask of mana regeneration water, meant to restore lost mana. And a flask of muscle recovery water, meant to restore peak muscular function. After filling his tray, Leo made his way to a corner table, preferring to eat alone. As he sat down, he took his first bite, expecting nothing special, only to be pleasantly surprised. The meat was tender and well-cooked, while the vegetables retained a crisp freshness that suggested careful preparation. It wasn't gourmet by any means, but it was far better than tasteless military rations. And for now, that was enough. However, as he continued his meal in silence, more first-year recruits flooded into the mess hall. The noise level steadily rose as students grabbed food, formed groups, and engaged in introductions, eager to establish early alliances or friendships. Leo instinctively scoffed at their behavior. Naive, he thought, as he felt like he had seen this before. People forming bonds out of convenience, not loyalty. Trust was a fragile thing, and trusting one's back to another was by far one of the dumbest mistakes a man could make. Most of these so-called friendships wouldn't last. The moment survival outweighed companionship, they would turn on each other, and Leo knew this well. The entrance test had already proven that much to him, as every assassin here had been forced to betray and eliminate their own partner to secure an entrance spot. That alone was proof of the true nature of people, which was selfish, calculating, and opportunistic at its core. Leo had no intentions of making alliances or engaging in pointless small talk. At least not today, or until he found someone truly worthy of being called a companion. However, unfortunately for him, as the mess hall filled to capacity, his quiet isolation was abruptly disturbed. Within minutes, the empty seats around him were occupied, and before long, he found himself surrounded by other students. A few first years at his table glanced in his direction, one of them attempting to initiate casual conversation. "You just gonna sit there all quiet? Why not introduce yourself too? I'm Meng-jun from the Magecraft branch." Another chimed in, grinning. "We're all fresh here. Might as well get to know each other." No, they were a group of 4 around him, who all looked to be from different branches, trying to rope him in for casual conversation. However, Leo did not take the bait. Instead, he offered a polite nod before saying, "Sorry, I don't speak while I eat." It was a polite yet tacit rejection, one that wouldn't sound too rude, but would pass on the message that he was not interested in small talk. "Must be from the assassin branch," Meng-jun noted, leaning back. "No interest in fraternizing, huh?" Leo merely smirked, taking another bite of his food. He wasn't antisocial, nor did he hate conversation. But for now, he decided that it was far more valuable to observe than to participate. "I'll just finish my food quickly and leave," Leo thought, increasing his pace as he scooped another bite into his mouth. But just as he did, a loud crashing sound tore through the mess hall's growing chatter, followed by the unmistakable thud of someone being thrown to the ground. Thud! The entire room fell into an uneasy hush. All around, heads turned toward the source of the disturbance. Near the center of the hall, a brutal scene was unfolding. A young man lay curled on the floor, clutching his stomach in pain, his gasps sharp and ragged. Towering over him, eyes filled with pure disdain, stood another recruit. Soo-young, a member of the prestigious Soo clan and, by all accounts, one of this year's strongest recruits. The air around him crackled with arrogance, as if the very act of standing near commoners was beneath him. Soo-young was tall and well-built, his raven black hair neatly tied in a warrior's ponytail. He had already changed into his academy uniform, which only added to the overbearing presence he exuded. Even from a distance, his noble upbringing was evident. From the self-assured way he carried himself to the thinly veiled contempt laced in his every word. He had the look of someone who had never once been denied anything in his life, and the sheer entitlement in his posture reflected that much. "You filthy, low-born scum," Soo-young sneered, his boot pressing down on the fallen recruit's shoulder, pinning him in place like an insect. You dare impersonate someone from the Mu clan by claiming memory loss. His voice dripped with scorn. Know your place, vermin. The student on the ground let out a strained groan, his breath hitching as he struggled to move beneath the crushing weight of Su Yang's foot. Murmurs rippled through the surrounding recruits, but no one immediately stepped in. Some turned away, unwilling to get involved. Others watched with wary intrigue, as if testing the boundaries of what the academy would tolerate. Leo, however, continued to eat, but his instincts were on high alert the moment he heard the mention of memory loss, for it hit him too close to home. Across the table, one of the students scoffed, muttering under his breath. Su clan brats are all the same, arrogant, overbearing, and violent. Another recruit snorted, shaking his head. The 6 great clans always act like they own the place. They think they're untouchable, but they're not, Meng Jun interjected, a knowing smirk playing at the corner of his lips. This academy has a way of humbling even the most arrogant noble brats. They won't get away with this forever. Leo remained silent, but mentally filed their words away. His eyes flicked back to Su Yang, who still hadn't lifted his foot from the fallen recruit, his expression that of someone stepping on something disgusting. The air in the mess hall had turned tense, thick with the weight of unspoken judgment. No instructors intervened. No enforcers appeared. Everyone was watching, waiting, to see if anyone would step forward or if this was simply the academy's way of weeding out the weak. That guy might actually deserve this beating, another voice muttered from nearby as Leo's ears sharpened at the comment. If he really is impersonating a Mu clan heir, then he's asking for it. Everyone knows how they operate, sending their young out into the world with no memory of their past to ensure they carve their own path. But recently, more and more small fries have started faking memory loss, hoping to gain sympathy and special treatment in the academies. Leo felt his stomach tighten slightly as he heard these words. This was bad. If there were already rumors circulating about frauds pretending to be Mu clan heirs, then he was in dangerous territory. Because if anyone started suspecting him of doing the same, then he could very well be next. Seconds passed by, but even though the student under Su Yang's feet continued to squirm, no one from the freshman class intervened. It seemed like everyone had accepted the beatdown as something natural, and no one had the guts to confront Su Yang about it. Perhaps it was because of his background, because he belonged to one of the 6 great clans. Or perhaps it was because of his domineering eyes, the kind that dared anyone to step up, only to crush them if they did. Whatever the reason, silence reigned. Until, click, 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 the synchronized rhythm of multiple boots echoed into the mess hall. Heads turned instinctively toward the entrance, as a group of second years walked in, moving with an air of effortless superiority. At the front of the group strode a young man with blonde hair and a sharp, refined presence. It was Du Yang, another scion of the 6 great clans. His gaze swept over the mess hall as he wondered why it was so quiet today, before looking at Su Yang as he figured out why. Du Yang did not look surprised. If anything, he looked mildly disappointed. Su Yang, he called out smoothly, his voice neither harsh nor particularly friendly. Are you seriously starting fights on day 1? In the mess hall of all places? Su Yang finally glanced up, his foot still pressing down on the beaten recruit, as his lips curled into a smirk. Long time no see, Cousin Du. I was hoping I'd meet you here in the academy, you know, Su Yang replied, as he seemed to already be acquainted with Du Yang, perhaps due to a shared familial bond. Du Yang sighed as if he had seen this 100 times before. If the instructors catch you, it won't end well, Du Yang remarked. In Rodova Military Academy, we have some rules. If you have a grievance against another student, you file for an official duel. Otherwise, you're breaking academy protocol and can be punished severely for your actions. Thankfully, there's no teachers around the mess hall right now, where you would be in a disciplinary holding cell by now. A few of the second years behind, Du Yang chuckled, clearly entertained by the interaction. Su Yang snorted, but finally lifted his boot off the recruit's shoulder, allowing the kid to cough and suck in air desperately. But rather than backing down, Su Yang merely crossed his arms and turned toward Du Liang with an unreadable expression. Do you know why I did this? Su Yang asked. Du Liang arched a brow, his curiosity mildly piqued. Su Yang gestured down at the trembling recruit, his lip curling in disgust. This worm was trying to pass himself off as a Mu clan descendant by faking memory loss. Du Liang's expression shifted slightly, listening to Su Yang's words, the hint of amusement on his face fading. That's so. Du Liang mused. Yes, Su Yang confirmed, his eyes narrowing at the recruit, still gasping for breath. And do you know how I can tell? He crouched slightly, leveling his gaze at the cowering student. He walks too loudly, Su Yang stated matter-of-factly. He flinches at the slightest motion, and he hesitated when I struck him. He rose again, turning back to Du Liang. A true Mu clan heir, even with zero memories, would have instinctively reacted. Their bones would remember what their mind forgot. Du Liang considered Su Yang's words for a moment before nodding. You're not wrong, he admitted. The Mu clan's training methods are extreme. Their reflexes should be ingrained to the point of muscle memory. If this guy had truly been one of them, he wouldn't be on the floor right now. The student in question flinched at the cold analysis, but neither Su Yang nor Du Liang spared him any further attention. Su Yang finally stepped back, his frustration still evident but restrained. Next time, I'll file a duel request, he muttered. But don't expect me to hold back. Du Liang smirked slightly. Good. That's how it should be. With that, the tension in the mess hall finally began to ease. The upperclassmen soon moved on, leaving the beaten first year on the floor, and Su Yang, though still exuding arrogance, returned to his table without another word. The mess hall slowly resumed its usual atmosphere, but an unspoken lesson had been made clear to every first year in the room. The 6 great clans ruled this academy, and unless you belonged to them, you'd do well to stay out of their way. Leo soaked in the entire exchange like a sponge, his mind processing every word, every movement, every unspoken rule. This was a lesson in hierarchy, in reputation, in how conflict was resolved in this academy. If he ever found himself at odds with Su Yang, it was clear that backing away wasn't an option. The Su clan heir wasn't the type to let things go, nor was he the type to respect submission. Unless you fought back, unless you stood your ground, Su Yang would continue pushing, escalating, humiliating. That was the kind of person he was. And Leo had no intention of ever being anyone's punching bag. That said, he sincerely hoped he would never find himself at odds with that madman. There was a brutality to Su Yang's actions that unsettled him, not in fear, but in the sheer lack of hesitation. Su Yang wasn't just arrogant. He was smart, ruthless, and seemed to have the skills to back his attitude. He walked around with a sort of certainty. A certainty that came from knowing exactly where he stood in the world, from being raised in an environment where he was undeniably superior to others. Even the way he spoke, the way he carried himself, the way he walked, it all reflected his background. Leo had never paid much attention to how a person's gait could reveal so much about them. But now, after watching Su Yang and Du Liang's interaction, he understood. There were tells, subtle but undeniable. A man's past wasn't just in his words. It was in his posture, his instincts, the way he moved through a room. And if that was the case, then Leo had a problem. Because he didn't know his own tells. He didn't know what his mannerisms said about him. He didn't even know what they were supposed to say. His memory loss wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a massive blind spot. And, to make matters worse, without his memories, he felt like he lacked the context to make sense of half the conversations happening around him. Every mention of the 6 great clans, the Mu clan, or the clan heirs, were all just names to him, fragments of a bigger picture he had no access to. And in a place like the Rodova Military Academy, not having the ability to decipher the bigger picture was undoubtedly a big handicap. Leo clenched his jaw slightly, a quiet resolve settling within him. He needed to fix this. He needed to learn about this world, and fast, for if he did not start filling in the gaps in his knowledge soon, he wouldn't just be another faceless recruit. He'd be prey, hunted before he even knew the rules of the game. After finishing his meal, Instead of returning to his dorm room, Leo began searching for the academy library. His logic was simple. Every academy had a library, and it was the safest way to gain insights into the world he found himself in. While the fastest and easiest way to learn would have been to simply ask a fellow student, that approach carried far too many risks. Revealing that he had memory loss, especially in a place like this, could get him flagged as a target. And after witnessing how the poor guy in the canteen was humiliated and beaten for allegedly faking his background, Leo knew he couldn't afford to let anyone suspect his own ignorance. Thus, the library was the safest solution. It took him a while to find it, as the academy was vast, with sections sprawling in different directions. But after a few wrong turns and a fair bit of aimless wandering, he finally spotted it, a grand art structure near the Magecraft division of the academy. The academy library. Stepping inside, Leo found himself in an expansive hall lined with towering bookshelves, stretching beyond what the eye could immediately perceive. Dim, enchanted lanterns hovered between the shelves, casting a soft, steady glow, while the air carried the distinct scent of aged parchment and polished wood. At the front, positioned behind a sturdy desk, sat an elderly librarian, his robes modest but neat, silver-rimmed glasses resting low on his nose as he skimmed through a massive tome. His wispy white beard and sharp, observant eyes made him look like someone who had seen everything and forgotten nothing. Leo hesitated, but before he could speak, the old man's voice cut through the silence. "Boy!" The librarian gestured for him to approach. Leo complied, keeping his expression neutral. The old man studied him briefly, then adjusted his glasses with a tired sigh. "While I'm pleased to see a first year in here on the very first day, it's against library rules to allow students to enter without their academy uniform." Leo blinked, glancing down at himself. He was still in casual clothes, the same ones he'd been wearing since arriving at the academy. "I'm assuming you're new and just unfamiliar with the rules," the librarian continued. "So I'll let slide this once. But starting tomorrow, wear your uniform before stepping into my library." "Understood." Leo gave a small nod. "Understood." The librarian gave an approving grunt before folding his arms. "Now then, what kind of books are you looking for?" Leo coughed slightly, feeling a bit exposed at the direct question as he did not want to make his memory loss obvious, and hence he tried to keep his request vague. "I'm just looking around. I'll read anything that piques my interest," he said, as the librarian wagged his finger in disapproval. "There are over 47,000 books in this library, 12,000 skill scrolls, and an untold number of meditation manuals. If you think I'm going to let you aimlessly wander, you're mistaken. You either come in here with a specific request, or I kick you out," the librarian said with finality, as Leo winced slightly at his words. If possible, he did not wish to reveal that he was looking for general knowledge, especially knowledge that any normal person in this world should already know, but seemed he had no other choice. "Sir, if possible, could you point me toward books on general world knowledge? Something that covers the social hierarchy, the 6 great clans, how important they are, basic things that everyone is expected to know." The librarian raised a brow at his request. A moment later, he set his book down and rubbed his temples before muttering, "So you're one of the memory loss candidates, huh?" Leo stiffened ever so slightly. The librarian had figured him out immediately. This was the 3rd time someone had suspected a student of having memory loss within a single day. It was beginning to make him wonder just how common people like him were in this world. "Sir," Leo asked cautiously, "are students like me common in this academy?" The librarian nodded without hesitation. "We get 4 or 5 like you every year. It's not unusual. Ever since the Mu clan started sending out its scions with memory loss, smaller clans have begun copying the practice." Leo frowned slightly. "Why do they do it?" The old man sighed. "The logic behind it is simple. When sending young heirs out into the world, it's best to erase their pre-existing biases so they can approach new knowledge with an open mind. The Mu clan pioneered this method because they didn't want their young to act unruly outside the clan, tarnishing their reputation." The librarian shook his head with mild disapproval. "But to be honest, The Mu brats were always well-behaved to begin with. The ones who caused the most trouble, the other 5 great clans. Yet, ironically, it's the most decent clan that's worried about its public image the most. He scoffed lightly before waving his hand dismissively. Doesn't matter. None of that is your concern. Finally, he pointed toward a specific bookshelf. Shelf number 1221. Bottom row. There's a book titled Quick Guide to the Universal Power Scale. That should answer at least half of your questions. Leo glanced in the direction the librarian pointed before nodding. Thanks. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the bookshelves. Because if that book could answer half of his questions, then he would finally begin piecing together the truth behind the world he was trapped in. Leo moved silently through the towering bookshelves, his sharp eyes scanning the carved numbers on the polished wooden frames. 1218, 1219, 1220, there. Shelf 1221. Crouching down to the bottom row, his gaze immediately landed on the book the librarian had mentioned. Quick Guide to the Universal Power Scale. The tome was thick and well-worn, its dark blue cover slightly faded, while the gold-embossed lettering along its spine had dulled from years of handling. Leo slid it from the shelf, feeling the unexpected weight of the volume in his hands. Flipping it open, he skimmed the first few pages, his eyes catching key phrases: the universal hierarchy, the 6 great clans, the evil cult governing structures. Perfect, he thought, as glancing toward the front desk, he spotted the librarian already back to his own reading, showing no further interest in him. Good, that means I won't be disturbed, Leo concluded, as he began searching for a quiet place to sit. At first, his search turned up only communal tables, occupied by senior-year students engaged in hushed discussions or independent studies. Not ideal, but after scanning further, he spotted something better. Near a dimly lit reading alcove, tucked between towering bookshelves, sat an isolated desk and chair. A simple wooden setup, its cushionless seat likely designed to discourage long hours of use. But comfort wasn't his priority. Privacy was. Without hesitation, Leo strode over, settled into the chair, and placed the heavy book onto the table. His fingers ran over the textured cover for a brief moment. Then, finally, he flipped it open. This book is written by a country bumpkin who grew up on a farm and had no idea about the various factions ruling the universe. It's intended only for clueless individuals who don't understand how tall Mount Tai is, and is written in crude language, based on my own experiences and understanding of the universe. This is not an official text, and the contents written in here may not be entirely accurate. That being said, I've tried to be as thorough as possible while writing this book, so that any clueless country bumpkin reading this may not make the same mistakes I did as a rookie recruit in the universal government. The very first page of the book was an author's note that informed the readers about what sort of a book this was and what to expect when they read it. It explicitly told its readers that it was not an official text, and that the information contained within was subjective. There are 8 great factions in this universe. The 6 great clans, the universal government, and the evil cult. To understand what makes them great, one first needs to understand the universal power scale. Broadly, within the universe, a warrior is classified into 7 different power realms. 1. Amateur, 2. Master, 3. Grandmaster, 4. Transcendent, 5. Monarch, 6. Demigod, 7. God. In most cultures, one is not considered to be a real warrior until they attain the minimum of a master realm, whereas gods are the absolute pinnacle of what a warrior can be. In this universe, gods are higher beings that are not only immortal, but have mastered the laws of space and time. They are 4-dimensional beings that can travel between any 2 points in this 3-dimensional universe instantaneously, and cannot be hurt or killed by mortal weapons. In other words, only gods can kill other gods. And in this universe, only the 8 great clans have gods at the pinnacle of their clan's hierarchy. The first couple pages of the book explained what were probably the most important concepts. Who were the biggest fishes in the universe? And why were they such a big deal? Turns out, there are 8 biggest fishes in the universe, with the big deal about them being that they are backed by the strongest warriors. In this universe, the six great clans and the universal government work in tandem with one another to form the Righteous Alliance. Together, they control over 75% of the universe's land and about 77% of the total population. Although smaller, independent clans do exist, none exert influence equivalent to the Righteous Alliance. In contrast, the evil cult works alone. They control less than 5% of the total universal land and less than 3% of the total population. They are the sworn enemies of the Righteous Alliance, and members belonging to their faction are hunted fervently within the righteous lands. The divide between the Righteous Alliance and the evil cult traces back to a single, pivotal event that occurred 2,000 years ago, the downfall of the most infamous figure in the universe's history, the Timeless Assassin. In a monumental battle, the strongest factions of the time united to eliminate him, marking the beginning of a new era. However, his followers refused to fade into obscurity. Those loyal to his cause formed what is now known as the evil cult, carrying on his legacy in defiance of the established order. Meanwhile, the remaining divine entities and ruling powers consolidated their influence, shaping themselves into what is recognized today as the Righteous Alliance. While over 140 clans are currently part of the Righteous Alliance, at its heart, it only has 6 dominant clans, each wielding immense influence. Su, Mu, Yu, Du, Lu, and Ru. These clans serve as its pillars, shaping policies, maintaining order, and dictating the balance of power across the universe. At the very core of this alliance, however, sits the universal government, the supreme governing body that enforces law and dictates the grand structure of civilization. While the majority of the great clans have only 1 or 2 gods backing them, the universal government has 5, making it by far the strongest single organization. However, with the great clans all sharing strong familial bonds amongst one another, the unity amongst the clans serves as a check and balance against the universal government's unilateral abuse of power. As Leo read the next few pages, he gained greater clarity into what exactly were the power dynamics between the 6 great clans and the universal government. Turns out, all the 6 great clans were fans of interbreeding and forming strong marriage bonds. The family tree between the clans was complicated as hell. However, as a result of all the intermixing, the bond between the great clans remained strong, at least on the outside. They usually had similar opinions against the universal government and pushed to pass legislation beneficial to them as a group. Leo flipped another page, and the author's discussion shifted toward a more intricate topic, one that dissected the structure of the 6 great clans. There are several branch families within the 6 great clans, and since these clans have existed for thousands of years, the number of branches in the modern day is downright ridiculous. Take this Sioux clan, for example. It alone has over 120 branch families. And while every single one of them shares the same prestigious surname, that doesn't mean they share the same level of power or influence on the universal stage. Broadly speaking, only the direct descendants of the gods backing the clans are considered main branch members, the true young masters and mistresses of their lineage, while the rest are glorified diplomats riding on a famous name at best. To put things into perspective, a true main branch descendant commands the same level of respect as a universal government major. Meanwhile, branch family members at best hold influence comparable to lieutenants, strong enough to push around weaker recruits, but powerless in the presence of real authority. That being said, empty pots rattle the loudest, and it is the branch family members, not the direct descendants, who are often the most arrogant and entitled. Lacking the strength of their main branch cousins, they rely on their surname to throw their weight around, intimidating the weak, currying favors, and generally making nuisances of themselves wherever they go. If you're a recruit below the rank of lieutenant, avoid confronting them. But if you're a lieutenant or higher, they can't do jack shit to you, so enjoy putting them in their place. The book explained, as Leo smiled slightly reading this page. Although he did not know the author of this book personally, he definitely enjoyed his personality and way of explaining things. Just as the Righteous Alliance has its young masters, the heirs of the great clans. The evil cult has its own equivalent. But unlike the young masters, whose status is determined by bloodline, the evil cult grants its title based purely on potential and strength. They call them dragons. A dragon candidate is an individual who displays exceptional talent and the potential to inherit the techniques left behind by the timeless assassin. While the exact criteria for selecting a dragon candidate remain a mystery, what is known is that every single one in history has been a walking catastrophe. The moment someone is identified as a dragon candidate, they become the most wanted individual in the universe, second only to the evil cult's own god. Hunting and eliminating a dragon candidate is considered a prestigious military achievement, often fast-tracking an officer's career within the universal government. That being said, never engage a dragon candidate unless you have reached at least the Grandmaster level. For all dragon candidates are among the most feared warriors the universe has ever known. The book explained, as Leo soaked in all this information like a sponge. The dragon candidates and the evil cult was yet another organization he had no clue about, and gaining some more context about them felt crucial to participate in future conversations around the Academy. With that, we cover everything that is to be covered regarding the universal power structure. The only thing left to explain now is warrior potential, the author wrote as he shifted to a new topic entirely. In this universe, not everyone is born equal, and your genetic potential plays a huge role in how far you can progress as a warrior. About 85% of the universe's population don't even possess enough talent to someday break into the Master Warrior realm, while only 1 in 300 Master Warriors ever become Grandmaster. This means that if you reach the Master Warrior realm, you're already top 15% of the universal population, whereas if you reach Grandmaster realm, you're already near the pinnacle of what life has to offer. Genetic testing is free at most universal government facilities for government employees, and depending on your aptitude, you may or may not be recruited by private guilds/mercenary groups or great clans. An officer with higher genetic potential will always be prioritized for promotion over a lower potential officer, and hence if you ever find yourself with a junior who is more talented than you, be kind to them, for they will someday surely surpass you. The author explained, as Leo absorbed the information with peak interest. Although he had no idea about what his own genetic potential looked like, understanding the politics around it seemed important. As a rookie officer, I made the mistake of altering my DNA by mixing it with that of a cat. Night vision was one of my weaker suits, and hence, I accepted a genetic modification serum. However, that was my biggest mistake. By accepting genetic modification, I sacrificed my potential to someday become an exceptional warrior for some short-term gains, and it is a decision that I greatly regret till date. Hence, to all the rookies reading my book, I warn you to not make the same mistake as me, and keep your natural DNA pure. Beast enhancements, while looking like an easy fix to your lack of strength at the low power stage, is an inferior method to grow stronger in the long run, and will hinder you the further you progress. Hence, it is my suggestion you don't do it, but the choice is ultimately yours, the author noted as Leo raised his eyebrow at the warning. Recalling how almost 50% of all recruits in the Academy entrance test seem to have undergone some form of beast enhancement or the other, Leo doubted the authenticity of this observation. However, since the author had no reason to lie in his book and seemed like a genuine guy, Leo decided to accept his advice for now, albeit with a grain of suspicion. Ding! Suddenly, a single sharp ding rang across the library, interrupting Leo's chain of thoughts as the librarian's voice boomed across the silent walls. "All right, reading time for the day is over. Vacate the premises at once," he said in his old husky voice, as all the students gathered within the library closed their books and proceeded to vacate the premises at once. Click, click, click. The sharp sound of polished boots striking tile echoed through the dimly lit corridors of the instructor's quarters. A woman walked down the hall with measured purpose, the name tag on her chest reading Ilti Nguyen Fei. If Leo saw her now, he would recognize her instantly. She was the instructor who had led the morning orientation and slipped him the note. After all, her short black hair, olive skin, and stern brown eyes were unmistakable. As she reached what seemed to be the location of her private room, she paused, quickly glancing over her shoulder as she swept the corridor for any threats, not out of fear, but out of sheer habit. However, spotting nothing, she pressed her palm against the biometric scanner on the door, gently unlocking the door. Beep. A faint beep followed, signaling a successful unlock, which was continued by the hiss of decompression as the heavy metal door to her room slid open. Out of all the rooms in the hall, she had the only one with such a security system, for she was the only one who had paid to specially get it installed. Stepping inside, she sealed the locks behind her, securing the room with a swift sequence of taps against the control panel, as only then did her rigid posture loosen ever so slightly. Her boots were the first to go, placed neatly beside the entrance, while the collar button on her uniform was next as she unbuttoned it on her way to the wall-mounted mirror. Staring at her own reflection, she let out a deep sigh as she studied her fake looks. Currently, she looked extremely calm, composed, and every inch the disciplined instructor she was supposed to be. But as she lifted her hands to her head, the facade began to fall away. Her jet-black wig came off first, revealing long, flowing red hair that tumbled down her back in soft, unruly waves. Her fingers grazed the synthetic mask covering her skin next, as with a few deft swipes, the olive complexion melted away, revealing smooth, wheatish-toned skin beneath. Next, she blinked once, popping out one of the two contact lenses she wore, as the deep brown eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, piercing gray, before she repeated the process for the second eye as well. Her transformation was now complete. The woman the Academy knew, gone, and in her place stood Mu Fan, branch family head of the Mu clan, a woman with no official ties to the evil cult, yet someone who was in reality one of its most devoted sympathizers. Sigh. Mu Fan exhaled, rolling her shoulders, as her expression shifted from calculated authority to something far more natural, something far more dangerous. Then, moving swiftly, she strode to the far wall of her room, where a seemingly unremarkable wooden panel sat embedded within the surface. With a precise flick of her wrist, she pressed her fingers against a specific rune carved into its edge. The panel pulsed faintly, then slid open, revealing a hidden compartment lined with intricate runic inscriptions. Inside, nestled within a protective casing, rested a communication crystal, a translucent black stone, its surface marbled with faint, pulsing red veins. Mu Fan lifted it carefully, rolling the cool surface between her fingers before infusing it with a sliver of her mana, as the communication crystal shimmered to life. Crackle. A faint static crackling noise played over the crystal until the communication was established, but once it was, a deep manly voice rumbled from the other side. Did our target make it into the Academy? The man asked, his words sharp, clipped, and direct. There were no greetings, no exchange of pleasantries, just straight business. He did, Mu Fan answered, her voice smooth and composed. She paused, her mind replaying everything she had observed throughout the day. He's cautious. He moves with purpose, doesn't let his guard down easily. He observes more than he speaks, and isn't reckless. Mu Fan reported, as the man on the other side absorbed her views. And his temperament? He asked, as Mu Fan nodded in acknowledgement. It's there, the foundation of it, at least. He doesn't trust easily, and he operates on calculated caution. He isn't a fool, that's for sure, she said, as another tense pause followed. Does he have the talent to be a dragon? The man asked, his voice turning even heavier, as Mu Fan exhaled slowly at the question. To become a dragon candidate, temperament alone wasn't enough. A dragon candidate needed more. They needed the raw, unrefined talent to embody the techniques of the timeless assassin, to become the kind of warrior who could strike fear into the gods of the universe themselves. It's too early to say, she finally replied, but we will know soon enough. A low hum sounded from the other side, but the man chose to remain silent, as if weighing his words. We shall see tomorrow after the aptitude test then. Keep me posted, he said, before terminating the connection. The crystal dimmed, its pulsing red veins fading into nothingness. Mufan lowered it slowly, her grip lingering for just a moment before tucking it back into its hidden compartment. With a final press of her fingers, the panel slid shut, concealing any trace of what had just transpired. She stood in silence for a moment, her gray eyes unreadable. Tomorrow would be the moment of truth. Tomorrow, she would find out whether Leo's sky shard was the dragon they needed, or just another disappointment. Leo lay in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, his mind a tangled mess of thoughts. He hadn't slept all night, not even for a second. The weight of uncertainty had kept him awake all night, as no matter how much he tried to rationalize it, the upcoming aptitude test gnawed at the back of his mind. The aptitude test was important, and based on the brief conversation he had with his senior on his way back from the library, it was a test and a background check mixed into one. The psychological phase of the test, though disguised as a simple evaluation, was in fact a thorough background check, and that thought unnerved him. Would his background check reveal something off? Would the results expose his memory loss? Would it flag him as an anomaly? These questions plagued him as he lay motionless in his bed, his eyes bloodshot from exhaustion, yet his body feeling strangely alert. I need to calm down, Leo thought, as taking a deep breath, he sat up, rubbing his temples before finally swinging his legs over the side of the bed. Outside, the academy grounds were already bustling. He could hear the faint chatter of students heading toward the orientation hall. It was time for the day's activities to begin, and hence, without another moment's hesitation, he grabbed his uniform, slipped it on, and made his way out the door. Rodova Military Academy. Orientation Hall, Aptitude Test Briefing. The orientation hall was massive, large enough to accommodate thousands of students at once. And on this particular morning, rows of recruits stood here in organized formations, their expressions ranging from confident excitement to nervous apprehension. Leo positioned himself somewhere in the middle, keeping a low profile as he observed his surroundings. Among the crowd, he caught glimpses of familiar figures. Su Yang, still exuding arrogance, standing with his arms crossed, and a few others that sat around him in the canteen. Funny enough, the whole canteen table seemed to be standing together, whispering amongst each other excitedly, as if they knew each other since ages. But before any long conversations could take place, thud, a heavy pressure filled the air as Principal Auric Danehart stepped onto the grand podium at the front of the hall. Dressed in a sharp military uniform, the retired Universal Government General carried an air of unquestionable authority, and the moment he stepped forward, all murmuring ceased. Good morning, all. I'm retired General Auric Danehart, the acting principal of this prestigious military academy, Auric said, as he introduced himself to the crowd. You have all made it past the entrance exams, which is admirable. Yes, but do not mistake this for an achievement. This is merely the beginning. Making it here is nothing. Surviving here is what matters, Auric said, as a quiet tension spread across the room. Rodova Military Academy is one of the finest institutions in the universe, a place that has produced some of the greatest warriors, strategists, and assassins in history. Here, you will have access to facilities that most soldiers in the Universal Army could only dream of. Meditation techniques that cost hundreds of thousands of merit points, genetic enhancement serums that could change the trajectory of your potential, and training regimens that will push you to your absolute limits. He paused, letting those words sink in before his tone sharpened. But understand this, everything you receive here will be earned. Rodova is not a place for mediocrity. We do not tolerate weakness, and we do not waste resources on those who do not show promise. There was a heaviness in his words, an unspoken warning. Then, shifting gears, he moved on to the real reason they were gathered here today. Which brings us to the reason you are all here, the aptitude test. The aptitude test is divided into 3 components, each one designed to evaluate a different aspect of your abilities. Your performance here will determine your training path, your assigned meditation manuals, and whether you are placed in the regular class or the elite class. At the mention of the elite class, A ripple of excitement and tension spread through the crowd. Everyone here knew what that meant. Elite class students receive the best instructors, the best resources, and the fastest track to power. It was a big deal to be placed in the elite class, for it was a proven fact that your environment and the people you surround yourself with played a big role in how you turned out as a warrior. The test will proceed as follows. First, we will assess your physical attributes. This includes raw strength, speed, endurance, reflexes, and natural combat instincts. The test is not about your current training level. It is about your base physical potential. Auric said, as he looked across the sea of recruits, "If you have a weak foundation, your future will be weak as well." The statement was blunt, cold, but undeniably true. The second test evaluates your psychology, your mental fortitude, your ambitions, your adaptability, and most importantly, your fundamental nature. His words sent an icy chill down many of the recruits' spines. Here at Rodova, we do not just train warriors, we train leaders. Those of you who hesitate, those of you who waver, those of you who have doubts, will be recognized for what you are. Weak. And in this academy, weakness is not tolerated. Leo's fingers twitched slightly. This wasn't a normal academy. This was a machine designed to forge future army majors and generals. A place where doubt and indecisiveness was a liability. Lastly, your genetic potential will be analyzed. This will determine how far you can realistically go and what methods will best maximize your growth. Some of you may possess rare genetic markers, traits that make you unique. Others may have very little worth enhancing. Auric said, his tone brutal and indifferent. Your scores in all three categories will be recorded and analyzed. Your placement will be determined based on your overall performance. For those of you who wish to be in the elite class, know that only the highest-ranked recruits will qualify. A palpable sense of tension filled the room as Auric finished introducing the test. For some, this was an opportunity. For others, it was a potential death sentence. As although everyone had made it into the academy, only a handful were going to make it to the elite class. Your testing will take place in batches. When your name is called, proceed to the designated area. Danehart said, as with that he concluded his speech. Stepping back, the principal let another academy instructor take up the microphone as she began calling names of all the recruits one after another. Leo's heart pounded as he watched the first set of recruits step forward. His name wasn't called yet, which meant he wasn't in the first batch scheduled for physical testing. However, when the names for the first batch of psychological testing were revealed, he was the third one in line to be evaluated, meaning he had to perform the test that he dreaded the most first. Leo walked alongside his batchmates, following the silent procession down the long, heavily secured corridor leading to the psychological testing chamber. No one spoke, not because they were told to keep quiet, but because no one wanted to be the idiot who looked excited for a test that could single-handedly decide their future. The hallway was lined with multiple security gates, their reinforced steel frames gleaming under the cold white lights above. For a simple psychological evaluation, the amount of security here felt excessive. But the academy didn't take risks. After all, this wasn't just an exam. It was a screening. Soon, they reached the end of the corridor, where a set of heavy black double doors loomed ahead. A row of metal chairs lined the wall beside it, and without instruction, everyone took a seat. One by one, recruits were called into the testing chamber, each name barked out by a bald, no-nonsense instructor standing by the entrance, while the rest of them sat in silence, waiting for their turn. At first, the whole hall was eerily quiet. The only sounds were the ones made by students occasionally shifting on their seats, restlessly tapping their feet against the floor, or someone cracking their knuckles a little too loudly. Then, someone with more nerves than sense finally spoke. "Fuck, this is the one test we can't fake." A scrawny recruit with a buzz cut ran a hand over his face, exhaling sharply. Next to him, a muscular guy with a thick scar running across his cheek clicked his tongue in agreement. No shit. Physical tests? You can train for those. Genetic potential? You're born with that. He leaned back, his posture too relaxed for someone facing a psychological interrogation. But this This is just a fancy way of figuring out if you've got the brain of a psycho or the soul of a bitch. A dark-haired girl scoffed, crossing her arms. They hook you up to a machine, put your ass in a chair, and start asking questions you can't lie about. She rolled her neck, popping the joints. Doesn't matter what you say. If your brain says otherwise, they'll know. That's bullshit, Buzzcut muttered. How the fuck is that even fair? A guy with a tattoo, snaking up his forearm, chuckled. His voice a strange, raspy hiss. Life is not fair, dumbass, he sneered, flicking out a forked tongue. Didn't you get this memo? Leo's eyes flicked toward the speaker, and he instantly noticed the genetic modification. The recruit was one of the enhanced, a snake hybrid of some kind. The murmurs continued. Then, of course, the real idiot started talking. A recruit with slicked-back blonde hair, the type who looked like he thought he was better than everyone else, let out a scoff. The only thing that matters is getting into the elite class. He leaned forward, smirking. No one from the regular class ever makes it big in life. It's a fucking death sentence. Scarcheek snorted. Yeah, well, neither does failing this test, dumbass. They catch you with the wrong mental inclinations, and you're done. Tattoo guy chuckled again, shaking his head. Imagine losing your spot over some dumb shit like sympathy for the evil cult or a desire to burn down the academy. And then, bang! The test room doors slammed open so violently that even the cockiest recruits snapped their heads up. 2 instructors stormed out, dragging a recruit by the arms. The guy looked wrecked. Blood smeared his lips, one of his front teeth was missing, and his nose was bent at an angle that sure as hell wasn't natural. The student thrashed weakly, his breath ragged, panic flooding his wide eyes. It's a mistake. It's a mistake, he screamed, his voice cracking. The instructors didn't even flinch. I'm not an evil cult sympathizer. I swear, I was just curious. I only said the dragon candidates sound cool because they're powerful. It doesn't mean I like the evil cult. His words blurred together, desperate and drowning in hysteria. Wait. I'm not connected to the evil cult. You have to believe me. He begged, but no one believed him. No one cared. The 2 instructors yanked him forward, dragging his ass out of the waiting room like he was a bag of trash. And for a brief moment, no one moved. Then, laughter. Tattoo guy grinned, shaking his head. Holy fuck, did he just admit that shit out loud? Scarcheek let out a sharp laugh. An evil cult simp trying to sneak into Rodova? What a dumbass. Buzzcut whistled. Imagine getting your face smashed in over some admiration kink. Blondie leaned forward, his smirk widening. You know, for a second, I thought they were going to snap his neck in front of us. Dark-haired girl snickered. They should have. Leo sat still, observing. His expression remained unreadable, but his mind was racing. This situation wasn't funny. Not to him, at least. A minute later, the 2 instructors returned, blood still staining their gloves. We do not tolerate evil cult sympathizers in Rodova Military Academy, the bald instructor said, as he let the weight of his words sink in. Then, he leaned forward slightly, his sharp eyes locking onto the recruits like a predator scenting weakness. If you have even the slightest soft corner for the evil cult, you'd be better off slitting your own throat right now. The words landed like a hammer. A few recruits stiffened and the instructor smiled. It was an ugly, knowing smile. Because if we catch you, he let the silence stretch. Long, uncomfortable. You'll wish you were dead. Then, just like that, he straightened. The smirk vanished as he turned toward the list in his hand. Leo Skyshard, you're next, boy, he said as he scanned the crowd for a Leo Skyshard, until Leo slowly got up. Chop chop, he urged, as he clapped his hands and pointed for Leo to quickly get in. As Leo stepped into the evaluation room, his gaze immediately landed on a single man seated across a long metal table. The man wore a crisp white coat, his demeanor calm and composed as he flipped through a thick dossier. Unlike the instructors outside, this man did not radiate menace or authority. His expression was neutral, almost pleasant, as if he were about to conduct a casual interview rather than an interrogation. But Leo knew better. The room itself betrayed the true nature of what was about to happen. The walls were reinforced steel, devoid of windows, as a single overhead light cast a clinical glow over the metallic surfaces. Behind the psychologist, a complex machine hummed softly, cables running from its base toward the chair opposite him, which Leo assumed to be the setup for the lie detector. "Please take a seat," the psychologist said as he finally looked up, giving Leo a friendly smile. Leo hesitated for a fraction of a second before lowering himself into the chair as the psychologist gave him an approving nod. Thud. Closing the thick dossier, the psychologist made eye contact with him before leaning towards him on the table as he said, "For protocol reasons, let me introduce myself. I am Dr. Adrian Kessler, and I will be conducting your psychological evaluation today." The way he spoke was casual, almost friendly, but Leo wasn't fooled by his kindness. Judging by the state of the previous student who had been dragged out of this room, Leo understood that this was anything but a friendly conversation. However, for the sake of not antagonizing the instructor, he kept his expression unreadable, maintaining steady eye contact with the psychologist as he refused to give anything away. For a few moments, neither spoke. Then, the psychologist leaned back in his chair and exhaled as if feeling amused. "Sabrina, administer the truth serum and patch him up to the machine. Use a higher dosage. This one has a strong brain." At his signal, an assistant entered the room, moving with practiced ease. A tray of medical supplies rested in her hands, the faint clink of glass vials breaking the silence. She barely spared Leo a glance as she approached. "Right arm," she said flatly. Leo complied, rolling up his sleeve as she swiped a cold antiseptic wipe over his skin. Meanwhile, the psychologist kept talking. "Curious to know why I flagged you as having a strong brain?" he asked in an amused tone as Leo arched an eyebrow. "You see, Leo, not many students can hold eye contact with me, especially not when I have my aura skill intimidation active," Adrian said with a smile as he watched Leo carefully, gauging his reaction. "Most recruits start squirming the moment they sit across from me. They act like mice trapped in a cage with a starving cat. But you didn't flinch, and I find that quite impressive." At that moment, Leo felt the sting of a needle piercing his skin. "Sabrina is administering the truth serum now," Adrian continued, his voice smooth. "It'll loosen your inhibitions, make you think less before you speak. From here on out, we'll be having a nice, honest conversation." Leo didn't reply. Adrian smiled, as if he found that amusing too. "You know," he mused, "there are only two kinds of people who can resist my intimidation skill." He held up a single finger. "First, those who've grown up in a rough environment, on the streets, constantly fighting for their lives, struggling for survival. People like that eat intimidation for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They don't scare easy." Then he lifted a second finger. "And second, those born into noble houses, raised around high-level warriors who leak intimidation aura all the time. They grow up immune to it." He tilted his head slightly, his sharp gaze locked onto Leo's. "So which one is it? Street rat or noble?" Leo remained silent, feeling the unfamiliar warmth of the serum spreading through his veins. But as the seconds ticked by, he realized something troubling. His mind was starting to feel hazy. A strange fog settled over his thoughts, dulling the sharpness of his awareness. His vision blurred at the edges, and a faint ringing buzzed at the back of his skull. "I asked you a question, Leo." Dr. Adrian's voice cut through the haze, calm yet expectant. His expression remained perfectly composed, but there was a certain sharpness in his gaze. "Which one is it? One or two?" Leo stared at him, but no response came. The doctor sighed, tapping his fingers against the metal table. "Sabrina, what was the dose?" 0.75. The assistant shook her head. 0.9. Adrian blinked, then let out an amused chuckle. 0.9, and he's still holding on? That's rare. He leaned back slightly, a smirk playing at his lips. "All right, administer an additional 0.3 milliliters of hallucination serum. Let's see how much of that willpower survives when reality stops making sense." Sabrina didn't hesitate. Another sharp prick, another injection, and then the world shattered. Leo's breath hitched as the colors around him twisted, bleeding into one another in unnatural ways. The walls seemed to pulse. The table in front of him stretched and shrank in uneven waves. His vision tripled as he began to see 3 doctors, 3 assistants, all moving at different speeds. A low hum filled his ears, rising and falling like distant whispers. It felt like his mind was floating, detached from his body. Yet, somehow, deep beneath all of it, a part of him remained aware. Despite the drugs invading his system, he wasn't babbling nonsense. His mind was fractured but not lost. But they didn't know that. If I don't act like the drugs are working, they'll pump me with more. Realizing this, Leo let his head loll to the side slightly, his eyelids drooping. He let his shoulders relax, his fingers twitching slightly as if struggling to focus. A perfect act. Adrian watched him closely, waiting for the serum to take full effect. Then, after a few seconds, he spoke again. "So, which one is it?" Leo let his gaze lazily drift back to him. And then, with a slow, sluggish slur, he finally answered. "I don't know." His voice was soft, distant. I don't remember. My memories, they're gone." Silence. Adrian's smirk disappeared. His expression didn't shift into suspicion. No, it was something else. Something closer to interest. The doctor steepled his fingers, his piercing eyes never leaving Leo's face. "Your memories erased, you say?" He exhaled slowly. "Well, isn't that fascinating?" Adrian said while leaning back, as he turned toward his assistant, expecting her to be amazed as well. However, she did not seem to care much. Raising her hands in mock surrender, she simply made an expression that said, "Hey, don't look at me. I'm just the assistant," which made the doctor chuckle before he returned his gaze back to Leo. "Leo Skyshard," he mused, rolling the name over his tongue. "That's what it says on your file. Tell me, is that the name you were given at birth? Or just the name someone told you belonged to you after your memories were erased?" he asked, as Leo's sluggish mind snapped into overdrive. This was dangerous. A wrong answer here wouldn't just raise suspicion. It could unravel everything. He forced his expression to remain distant, unfocused, as if he was struggling through the mental fog the drugs had induced. Then slowly, he let his lips part. A chit. His voice came out hoarse, like someone grasping at fragments of recollection. "It was written on a chit. When I woke up, they said it belonged to me." A soft beep from the lie detector signaled his answer passed as truth. Adrian's gaze flickered slightly, a glint of something unreadable flashing behind his eyes. "So you're not even sure if it's your real name?" he murmured, his voice laced with intrigue. Leo blinked slowly, the forced haze in his eyes making him look more dazed than he actually was. Adrian exhaled through his nose, drumming his fingers against the table in thought. "Well, that certainly complicates things, doesn't it?" He tapped the folder in front of him absent-mindedly before continuing. "Tell me, Leo, do you remember anything from before you woke up? Any flashes? Sounds? Emotions?" The question wasn't unexpected, but Leo knew his next answer had to be carefully measured. He let his brows furrow ever so slightly, as if trying, struggling, to recall something that wasn't there. Finally, he shook his head. "Nothing," he muttered, his voice just the right amount of tired. "It's just empty." Another soft beep. Another truth registered. Adrian tilted his head, observing him like a specimen under a microscope. "I see," he said before taking a long pause. "A curious case, aren't you?" he said, as his lips slowly curled into a smile. A smile that, at first glance, mirrored the kind one he had offered at the start of their conversation. But this time, there was something different about it, something off. Leo felt it. A shift in the air, a shift in the conversation. Something was about to change. Something dangerous. He could feel it, like a storm on the horizon. Silent, inevitable, and ready to strike. "Sabrina, bring me a blank sheet of paper and a pen," Adrian mused, his fingers drumming lazily against the cold metal table as he maintained unbroken eye contact with Leo. Without hesitation, Sabrina moved. Within seconds, she placed a crisp white sheet and a pen before the doctor. who immediately set to work. Leo watched, his vision still hazy from the drugs, as Adrian's hand moved with precision, sketching lines, curves, and intricate strokes with unnerving speed. Then finally the pen stilled. Adrian turned the paper toward him. "Look at this," he said, his tone casual, too casual. "Do you recognize this symbol?" Leo's unfocused gaze drifted downward, and his pulse slowed. The moment he saw it, alarm bells rang in his head. The symbol Adrian had drawn, it wasn't completely unfamiliar. No, it looked too much like the one he had been told to memorize from the last chit. Except, there were differences. Minor changes, small distortions, subtle tweaks. Leo rubbed his eyes, trying to focus, but his vision remained unreliable. The edges of the paper bled into each other, his drugged mind warping reality. In his blurred perception, the black ink seemed to shift as if alive. It's not the same, he realized, his mind working through the haze. But it's close, too close. A trap. That was the first thought that shot through his mind. This wasn't some random test. Adrian knew something. He was probing, fishing for a reaction. If Leo claimed not to recognize it at all, would that be suspicious? But if he confirmed it outright, would that dig his grave? A slow inhale. Then, in a voice deliberately sluggish and unsure, he muttered, "It looks familiar, like something I've seen before." But he blinked, shaking his head as if struggling to concentrate. "It feels off. Wrong." Some of the details, his hand twitched slightly as he gestured toward the paper. They're not quite right. The words left his mouth, measured, cautious. And then he watched for the slightest flicker in Adrian's expression, because whatever came next would tell him exactly how dangerous this conversation truly was. "Off? How so? Can you point out to me what you think is off here?" Adrian asked, his expression expectant, as he turned the paper slightly toward Leo. Leo's fingers twitched involuntarily at the question. His drugged mind was sluggish, but his instincts screamed at him to tread carefully. He couldn't outright claim ignorance, for that would be too suspicious. However, he also knew that confirming too much might also dig his own grave. Hence, he decided to tread carefully. Leaning forward, he squinted at the paper as if trying to focus through the haze. His words coming slow and slurred, just enough to sell the act. "There should be 3 pointed extensions at the bottom," he murmured, his hand lifting shakily to gesture. "Not 2. And the crown at the top," his finger drifted upward, "should have 1 spire, not 3. He blinked sluggishly, his vision warping the ink on the page. Yeah, it's close, but it's not right." For a long moment, Adrian simply stared at him. Then, finally, his lips curled into a knowing smirk. "A genuine Mu clan spawn," he murmured, leaning back in satisfaction. "That explains a lot." Sabrina's head snapped toward him, her expression turning sharp. "Mu," she echoed, disbelief laced in her voice. "He's a descendant of one of the big 6?" she asked, glancing at Leo again, as if re-evaluating him entirely. "How can you say for sure?" At that, Adrian let out a low chuckle, shaking his head in amusement. "Look at you," he teased, clicking his tongue. "The moment you hear the word Mu, you suddenly want to gobble him up." He teased, his smirk widening. "What happened to all that indifference from 5 minutes ago?" Sabrina shot him a dirty glare. "Shut up," she muttered, but her curiosity was already piqued. Adrian raised his hands in mock surrender before shifting his focus back to her, now explaining his deduction directly. "That symbol he innately remembers." Adrian tapped the paper again. "It's the mark of the Mu clan," he began, as Sabrina furrowed her brow. "So what? Anyone can remember that symbol," she argued back, as Adrian snorted through his nose, shaking his head. "When the Mu clan wipes a descendant's memory, they always leave 2 things behind: a fake name and a Mu clan seal buried deep in their subconscious." He leaned forward slightly, his voice growing lower, more deliberate. "That's how they operate. They send their young out into the world with no ties, no memories, nothing but their raw instincts and talent. It's their way of ensuring that their heirs grow strong without relying on family prestige. And while plenty of smaller clans, and even the evil cult, have started copying their methods, most don't even realize that the imprinting of the symbol is part of the process. Sabrina's lips parted slightly in realization. Adrian smirked at her reaction before continuing. And those who do memorize the Musil, they're frauds, fakes, people who just studied the symbol, not people who had it burned into their minds since birth. His fingers tapped against the table again, slow and deliberate. Only a real Mu clan descendant would be able to spot the inconsistencies. Even under heavy drugs, his brain recognized the differences. His instincts told him something was wrong. That's not something you can fake. Sabrina inhaled slightly, her gaze flicking to Leo, who still sat in a dazed silence. But Adrian wasn't finished. And that's just the beginning, he went on, his smirk deepening. His mana circulation? Smoother than nearly any student I've seen in years. That kind of efficiency is genetic. It's the kind of control that's ingrained in powerful bloodlines. Sabrina frowned. That alone isn't. Adrian cut her off with a raised hand. And then there's the way he moves. His eyes glinted with amusement as he motioned toward Leo. He walks without making a sound. Not a single wasted movement. That's not something an amateur picks up in a week. That's years of assassin training, drilled into his body before he even knew what it meant. Sabrina narrowed her eyes slightly, considering his words. Adrian chuckled. And his body? Lean, efficient, built for practicality, not just brute strength. That's exactly how the Mu clan trains their assassins. They don't waste time bulking up. They sculpt killers. He leaned back now, his smirk widening. But the real kicker? He flicked his gaze towards Sabrina, his expression turning smug. He resisted my pressure like it was nothing. Sabrina blinked. Adrian tapped his temple, as if reminding her. My intimidation skill isn't just for show. Most recruits flinch, sweat, their pulse spikes. Even most noble brats get uncomfortable. His smirk turned razor sharp. But him, he let out a low, amused hum. Not even a twitch. Not a single sign of discomfort. Like he spent his whole life around warriors who leak pressure just by existing. He tilted his head slightly. And tell me, would you think someone like that would be raised? Sabrina exhaled slowly, realization settling in. Adrian's smirk widened as he reached the final piece of his deduction. So let's sum it up, shall we? He tapped his fingers against the table one last time as he leaned back into his chair. The subconscious knowledge of the Mu clan symbol. The unmatched mana circulation. The silent, assassin-trained movements. The refined, combat-ready physique. And the utter immunity to my intimidation aura. His smirk sharpened, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. While one of these parameters can be faked, all of them together, he let out a small chuckle. Only one conclusion makes sense. He motioned toward Leo with a final, knowing glance. This brat is from the Mu clan. This brat is from the Mu clan. Adrian's words landed like a hammer, final and absolute, but inside Leo's mind, they only created chaos. Leo did not react outwardly, keeping his expression dazed and unfocused to maintain the illusion that the drugs had taken full effect. But beneath the surface, his thoughts churned violently, trying to make sense of what he had just heard. Mu clan? Me? The possibility had never even crossed his mind before today. Even without his memories, something deep within him rejected the notion entirely, as if his very instincts refused to accept the label that had just been stamped onto him. The Mu clan was one of the 6 great clans, a family of warriors so refined and elite that they operated at the very pinnacle of universal power. Their heirs were born into prestige, raised in wealth, molded by the finest teachers and strategists the universe had to offer. And yet, he was supposed to be one of them? It didn't add up. For all the reasoning Adrian had laid out, his smooth mana circulation, his silent movements, his ability to withstand intimidation, Leo still couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That no matter how well the pieces seemed to fit, they had been forced together rather than them naturally aligning. That someone, somewhere, was desperately trying to pass him off as a member of the Mu clan. But why? Was this an elaborate scheme by a minor clan trying to elevate their status? Had they created a false heir, hoping to slip one of their own into the academy under a powerful name? Or was it something more insidious? Could the evil cult be behind this? Had they planted him here as a sleeper agent, wiping his mind to ensure he integrated seamlessly into the righteous alliance, waiting for the perfect moment to trigger his true allegiance? But that didn't make sense either. If the evil cult was truly responsible, wouldn't he feel something, some buried instinct, some deep-rooted pull toward their cause? Even if his past self had ties to them, the current him had no such inclinations. No loyalty, no hidden sense of belonging. If he had been one of them, they wouldn't have let him go so easily, which only left one final, far more dangerous possibility: that this was the work of another great clan. A game of deception on a level beyond his understanding. The 6 great clans were locked in constant political warfare, always maneuvering, always scheming, always looking for ways to undermine one another. If one of them had placed him here under the guise of a Mu clan heir, then he wasn't just a pawn, he was bait. But for who? And for what purpose? His thoughts moved too quickly for his sluggish, drugged mind to keep up with. And yet, through all the spiraling theories, one certainty stood above everything else. I am not from the Mu clan. He didn't know how he knew it. He had no memories, no past to verify it. But it didn't matter. Some things weren't remembered. They were felt. And every fiber of his being told him that he had never been noble-born. He was not the kind of person who had grown up in a lavish estate, trained under prestigious masters, and had his path paved for him by wealth and lineage. No, he could feel it in his bones. He had crawled his way up from something else, something lower, something harsher. So why? Then, why? Was someone trying so hard to convince the world otherwise? Before Leo could dwell on the thought, Adrian's voice cut in. All right, the psychologist mused, flipping to a fresh page in his notes. Let's move on to something more direct. His gaze sharpened. What are your thoughts about the evil cult? Do you know what they are? Leo didn't hesitate this time, as he delved straight into a response. I don't particularly know what they are, but I visited the library yesterday to fill in some gaps in my memory, he began, as Adrian nodded for him to continue. From what I read, they're a foolish organization on the verge of being wiped out completely, Leo said plainly. They control less than 5% of the universal land and are locked in a war they can't win. Their leader has been dead for 2,000 years, yet they're still clinging to a lost cause. Adrian noted something down before asking his next question. Do you have any inclinations to join them in the future? Any sympathies? Leo shook his head. None. They seem like too much trouble, and I don't want that kind of problem in my life. A soft beep. Truth. A soft smile spread on Adrian's face as the machine registered Leo's response as the truth, as he seemed to now be genuinely satisfied with the results of the interrogation. Opening the thick dossier that he closed at the start of the conversation once again, he flipped to the page where Leo's information was to be noted. Threat assessment. Potential affiliation with the evil cult. None. Psychological strength as a warrior. Above average. Mental fortitude. Noteworthy. Subnotes. Possible Mu clan descendant. Unusual natural discipline. Exceptional mental control. A student worth monitoring this year. With a satisfied nod, Adrian shut the file, his smirk lingering as he gave Leo one last, approving glance. Welcome to Rodova Military Academy, Mr. Skyshard, he said smoothly, tapping the closed dossier. I hope the rest of your tests go as well as this one. I'll be keeping an eye on you this year. Sabrina, he said, signaling towards his assistant. Take him to the recovery room. Let the drugs wear off properly before his next evaluation. Sabrina responded immediately, stepping to Leo's side and slipping her arm around his waist. Leo, still feeling the lingering effects of the injections, barely had the strength to resist as she pulled him up, guiding his half-limp body toward the exit. Unlike earlier, when she had handled him with disinterest, her demeanor now had shifted entirely. Unlike the cold indifference before, her demeanor now was soft, sweet, almost too sweet, as she tried to leave a good first impression on Leo's mind. Deliberately leaning in, she let her warm breath brush against his nose as she exhaled a little forcefully to make sure her floral scent lingered in his nose. She was trying to seduce him, trying to leave a positive impression. However, unfortunately for her, Leo did not give a rat's ass about her pathetic attempts. "You're going to recover soon. I'll help you," she said in a soft, coaxing tone. However, her vixen-like voice only made Leo's stomach convulse in repulsion. Leo's mind was still sluggish, but not enough to miss what was happening. This bitch was a gold digger. She had heard Adrian's assessment. She had heard the words Mu Clan. And now, she had suddenly decided that he was worth being helpful to, a fact that made Leo immediately hate her guts. It seemed like his newfound status came with more than just attention. It came with shifts in people's attitude, but he had no intention of leaning into this newfound status. Not yet. Being mistaken for a noble had its benefits, but also came with scrutiny. And right now, scrutiny was the last thing he needed. Until he figured out who he really was, Leo knew that it was best to stay in the shadows. After carrying Leo into the recovery room, Sabrina injected him with a series of recovery serums, ensuring the drugs in his system would dissipate faster. Her touch was practiced, efficient, yet there was a hesitation in the way she lingered, her eyes scanning his face one last time before she finally turned on her heel and exited the room. The door sealed shut behind her with a soft click, as only then did Leo allow himself to exhale, releasing the tension he hadn't realized he was holding. The psychological test was over, and it seemed like he had passed without raising any red flags. It had been the most dangerous evaluation yet, one where a single misplaced word, one slight slip in control, could have meant the difference between safety and exposure. Yet, despite the heavy drugging, despite the warped vision and floating sensations, something within him had remained steady. His body had been compromised, his senses dulled, but his mind, his conscious reasoning, had stayed intact. That alone had ensured his survival. Pressing a hand to his forehead, Leo recalled how, even when the world around him had twisted and blurred, he had never fully lost control. His instincts had taken over, shaping his words with precision, ensuring each response was subtle enough to avoid scrutiny, yet deliberate enough to not arouse doubt. It was as if his mind had an inbuilt failsafe, something deeply ingrained that kept him stable, even when everything else was stripped away. A normal person would have crumbled under that level of drugging, he mused. So why didn't I? Another question, another anomaly, another unsettling piece in the ever-growing puzzle of his existence. But there was no time to dwell on it. An hour passed in the blink of an eye. The effects of the drugs gradually wore off, clarity returning to his mind as his body regained its usual sharpness. His limbs no longer felt heavy, his vision had cleared, and the mental fog had fully lifted. Then, click, the door to the recovery room swung open. Time for the physical test, cadet. Line up. An instructor stood at the threshold, his tone curt, leaving no room for hesitation. As without a word, Leo rose to his feet, stepping out into the hallway where the rest of his batch had already gathered. The time for rest was over. The next test was about to begin. Rodova Military Academy, Department of Physical Monitoring, Pre-Test Preparation. Leo had no idea how Rodova intended to conduct its physical aptitude tests. He had assumed it would be something traditional like running a brutal marathon to test endurance, a weightlifting challenge to measure strength, or even a sparring match to gauge reflexes. However, he couldn't have been more wrong in his assumption, with his mistake becoming evident the moment he stepped into the Department of Physical Monitoring, as he was reminded of the fact that Rodova was a top-2 military academy. The testing facility didn't resemble a training hall at all. Instead, it looked more like a high-tech medical research center, its interior sleek and clinical. The walls were pristine, lined with embedded diagnostic scanners that blinked with soft, rhythmic pulses. Rows of biochambers, each inscribed with glowing runes, stood in precise formation, while the only people moving around were academy personnel dressed in crisp white coats. The air carried a faint hum, a symphony of whirring machines and automated systems running in perfect sync, and even the floors gleamed, polished to perfection, as if they had never seen a speck of dust. A group of recruits, all part of his batch, stood near the entrance, their expressions mirroring his own confusion. "Skyshard, Leo!" A voice called his name, snapping him from his thoughts. Turning, Leo spotted an assistant in a fitted white uniform, a data slate in her hands. She barely glanced up before gesturing to him to join her in a separate preparation area. "Strip to your underwear. Stand in the scanning zone," she instructed, still absorbed in the data on her slate. Leo hesitated briefly. Stripping in front of a woman wasn't exactly something he had anticipated doing today, but there wasn't much choice in the matter. He wasn't ashamed of his body. He had seen himself in the mirror while getting ready this morning, and he knew he was in good shape. However, stripping in front of an unknown woman still felt embarrassing to him, as his cheeks flushed a slight tint of red while undressing. As he pulled his shirt over his head and stepped out of his boots and pants, he caught the assistant glancing at him, her gaze sweeping over his frame with a quick, practiced assessment. She didn't seem particularly flustered. This was clearly a routine part of her job, but she gave a small, amused smile, as if she had seen plenty of impressive physiques before, and while she wasn't overly impressed, she wasn't disappointed either. Leo was lean, with a well-toned body that looked like it was built for agility rather than raw strength. He had almost no fat on him, his skin gripping his muscles tightly, as he looked like he had honed his body through years of training that not even he remembered. As he completed stripping, the assistant let out a quiet hum before turning back to her slate. "Step into the scanning zone," she instructed, as Leo complied, moving onto a circular platform, where a thin red laser immediately began scanning his body from head to toe. A soft hum resonated through the air as holographic measurements flickered into existence on a nearby monitor as height, weight, muscle density, joint flexibility, arm reach, and even mana distribution were noted. Within seconds, the scan was complete. But before Leo could step down, the assistant approached him again, this time holding a small container filled with a shimmering blue gel. "Hold still," she said, dipping her fingers into the gel before running her hands over his skin. Leo stiffened slightly at the unexpected sensation. The gel was cool to the touch, but as soon as it made contact with his body, he felt an odd warmth spreading through his muscles, like tiny currents of mana were seeping into his skin. Technically, at other stations, students were instructed to apply the gel themselves. It was a simple process, meant only to ensure proper conductivity for the tests. But here, the assistant took her time. Her hands moved with practiced ease, methodically spreading the cool gel across his arms, shoulders, and back before trailing down to his chest and abdomen, ensuring it was properly applied. Leo stole a glance at her, catching the faintest trace of a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. And in that moment, he realized she wasn't just doing her job. While she wasn't being particularly inappropriate, nor was she making any obvious advances, there was something about the way she worked. How her fingers lingered just a fraction longer than necessary, and how she smoothed over the same areas with a touch too much precision. That made it clear. She was indulging herself. A harmless appreciation. A momentary distraction in an otherwise routine task. If she noticed Leo's subtle realization, she gave no sign of it. Instead, she simply continued on, her hands never pausing, as she casually started talking. "You know, you're lucky to be a student at Rodova," she mused, her hands still smoothing the gel over his skin. "Only we in Geneva have this testing facility." Leo's gaze flicked toward her. "That's so." She nodded, looking smug. "Rodova and Geneva are the only two military academies in the universe that have a department of physical monitoring. Everywhere else still relies on outdated testing methods." She shifted behind him, her hands now running over his back, pressing the gel into his shoulder blades and lower spine. Leo tensed slightly at the sensation, but kept his expression neutral. The assistant, seemingly enjoying her own lecture, continued. "Most academies still rely on old-school physical testing, running marathons, lifting weights, knife dodging, but those tests don't really measure a student's true potential. They measure a mix of physical condition and mental resilience, which makes them inaccurate. She tapped his lower back lightly, signaling for him to turn around so she could finish applying the gel to his chest. Leo turned, his eyes narrowing slightly. Inaccurate? How? He asked as the assistant chuckled. Inaccurate indeed, for those tests don't measure your raw physical potential. They measure your mindset, willpower, and adrenaline-based responses mixed in with physical stats. She replied, her hands now sliding down to Leo's forearms as she massaged the gel into his skin. Take endurance running, for example, she continued. If a student is told to run a marathon, it doesn't just test their stamina, it also tests their willpower. If that same student were running for their life, they go twice as far before collapsing. Meaning, in a traditional test, you aren't just measuring endurance, you're measuring a mental factor too. She tapped her temple. Same goes for lifting weights. A person's maximum strength output in a battle scenario, where adrenaline is high and survival instincts are kicking in, is completely different from what they can lift under normal conditions. Leo processed her words, and despite his doubts, he had to admit it made sense. Traditional physical testing couldn't separate mental pressure from raw physical performance. And because of that, the results were always bound to be flawed. The assistant gestured toward the glowing test chambers. That's where Rodova is different. Her smirk widened slightly, as if she was proud of what she was about to say. The biochambers in this facility don't just record how strong you are. They measure the very limits of your physiology. Leo stepped off the scanning platform as the assistant gestured toward a towering, capsule-like structure built into the far wall of the testing facility. It stood nearly 10 feet tall, its surface sleek and reinforced with intricate runic inscriptions glowing faintly in rhythmic pulses. Transparent at the front, its interior was dimly lit with a single seat positioned in the center, surrounded by countless needle-thin tubes and embedded sensor pads. A biochamber. All right, you're prepped, the assistant said, flicking through her data slate. Time to step inside. Leo cast the chamber a wary glance. It looked more like a containment unit than a testing device. Remind me again what this does, he asked as he approached. The assistant smirked. Measures every physical attribute you have down to the cellular level. Leo gave her a look. And I just sit there? She chuckled, gesturing toward the open chamber door. Oh, you'll do a lot more than sit. Handsome. But you'll see soon enough. Not reassuring. Still, with little choice, Leo stepped forward, placing one foot inside the pod, followed by another. Hiss! A pressurized seal activated, the transparent door sliding shut behind him. Almost instantly, the temperature inside the chamber dropped, cool air flooding in as countless invisible sensors came alive. A mechanical voice echoed from within the chamber. Vital scan commencing. Subject, Skyshard Leo. Leo watched as holographic displays flickered into view before him, scrolling lines of data rapidly analyzing his body composition. The assistant's voice crackled in through an intercom. Okay, first phase, passive scan. Just sit tight while we map your baseline stats. Leo exhaled and leaned back into the chair as thin, flexible restraints coiled loosely around his wrists and ankles. Not restrictive, but firm enough to prevent unnecessary movement. A moment later, the pod's internal walls pulsed with a wave of mana, sweeping over his body in a scanning motion. Leo didn't feel pain, but he felt something absurd. A slight tingling sensation, like static electricity, dancing across his skin as holographic data streams flashed before his face. Height, 6 feet 1 inch. Weight, 72 kilograms. Muscle density, high. Flexibility, advanced. Mana circulation efficiency, unusually high. The moment that last statistic appeared, the assistant let out an amused hum from outside. Huh, your mana circulation is insanely efficient. You must have a lot of great skills now, wouldn't you? Leo remained silent, processing the information. Did he have any skills? He wasn't sure, as without his memories, he could not be certain about anything. He did know that he did possess a strange ability to fight with the world around him being in slow motion. However, he did not know how to activate that skill on command. All right, time for Phase 2, Strength Evaluation. The assistant said from the outside, interrupting Leo's thoughts as a cold mechanical voice within the pod followed. Phase 2 commencing. Almost immediately, needle-thin probes extended from the chamber walls, moving toward him with eerie precision as Leo's muscles tensed instinctively. Then, prick! 100 microscopic needles simultaneously pressed into his arms, shoulders, legs, and core, embedding themselves just beneath his skin, latching onto his muscle fibers like some sort of intricate web. Leo's breath hitched. The sensation was strange. Not painful, but unnerving. It felt as if thousands of invisible threads were burrowing into his body, mapping out every individual muscle strand, as outside the chamber, the assistant monitored the data feed. All right, Leo, don't move. These probes are measuring your exact muscle density and fiber composition, she instructed as Leo exhaled, forcing himself to stay still as the process continued. A moment later, the chamber's internal display began rapidly processing the data. Strength potential, 3,210 kgf. Muscle density, high. Fiber type ratio, 23% slow twitch, 77% fast twitch. The assistant hummed in approval. Only above average raw strength, but she trailed off, tapping her data slate. Then, oh damn. Leo frowned. What? The assistant let out a low whistle. Your muscle composition is weird. Most people have a fairly balanced mix of slow twitch and fast twitch muscle fibers. But 77% fast twitch? That's absurd. Leo processed the information. Fast twitch fibers were responsible for speed and explosive power rather than pure endurance or sustained strength. Meaning, he wasn't built for long, drawn-out battles of brute force. He was built for instantaneous devastation. The needles suddenly retracted, vanishing into the chamber walls. Then, strength evaluation complete. Proceeding to explosive power test. Leo barely had time to react before. BZZZT. A jolt of electricity surged through the chamber, flooding his nervous system like a violent pulse. Leo's entire body convulsed for a split second, but then, before he even registered the shock, his muscles instinctively coiled and released. His back arched. His arms jerked. Every muscle fiber in his body fired at once. The test wasn't just measuring strength. It was testing his muscles' reaction time and how fast could his body unleash peak power the moment it was triggered. The chamber's displays flashed again. Explosive force output, 9,870 kgf. Silence. Then, from outside the chamber. Holy shit. The assistant stared at the readings, her fingers tightening around her data slate. That's absurd. Leo exhaled sharply, feeling the residual charge still flickering across his nerves. His body wasn't built for slow, overwhelming force. It was built for instantaneous destruction. However, the sheer output it could produce was absurd to the point where Leo's readings mirrored those of an average pass-out as a first year. Professor Marvin is going to have a field day with you. I can already estimate his elated reaction when he looks over your student data panel, the assistant said, as she clicked a few buttons on her data slate, causing an oxygen mask-like thing to fall from the top of the chamber. Put it on, pull it over your nose and mouth, and fasten the strap, she instructed as Leo followed. The third test will be for your lung and blood function. Things like your lung capacity and how fast your blood can carry oxygen to your organs and muscles. Also, how your muscles perform under lactic acid buildup, the assistant said, as upon her command the third test began. Third test commencing. The mechanical voice within the chamber droned as immediately a burst of pure oxygen hit Leo's nose. The air rushing through the mask was crisp, almost unnaturally refreshing, as his lungs instinctively expanded to take it in. It felt clean, too clean, as if every breath was stripping away any exhaustion, flooding his bloodstream with nothing but pure, untainted energy. For a few seconds, nothing else happened. Then, HSSSSSS. The oxygen supply cut off, replaced by a sudden shift in air composition. Leo's chest tightened slightly as he realized the breathable oxygen was rapidly decreasing, being replaced by thinner, less concentrated air. Your body is now being exposed to low oxygen conditions, simulating high-altitude environments. This will measure your lung capacity, oxygen absorption rate, and overall endurance under stress. The assistant said, as Leo inhaled slowly, adjusting to the sudden change. He took deeper, controlled breaths, maximizing the intake with every inhale, minimizing unnecessary exertion. As soon another stream of data flickered to life on the holographic display inside the chamber. Resting oxygen saturation, 99%. Heart rate, 52 BPM. Lung capacity, 8.1 liters. Oxygen absorption efficiency, 34% above standard. A low whistle came from the assistant outside. Damn, your lung capacity is already beyond most first-year recruits. And your oxygen absorption efficiency, that's noteworthy as well. Leo remained silent, focusing on his breathing. Even though the air was thinning further, he didn't feel lightheaded, nor did his body show signs of distress. Then, without warning, BZZZT, a low-voltage shock pulsed through his system, not strong enough to cause pain, but enough to make his muscles react. At the same time, the chamber's air thinned even more. Leo's pulse quickened, his chest tightening as his oxygen demand surged. All right, now we're testing how well your blood carries oxygen under stress. The assistant's voice carried a hint of intrigue. Your muscles are being forced to work harder, while your oxygen supply keeps dropping. Let's see how long you can last before your blood starts screaming for air. Leo exhaled slowly, keeping his breathing steady. Data continued to stream. Blood oxygen saturation, 94%. Heart rate, 91 BPM. Energy output under oxygen deficit, 42% above standard. The assistant let out an amused chuckle. Well, look at that. Your blood oxygen retention is absurdly high. Leo didn't need her to tell him that. He could feel it. Most people would have started feeling dizzy or sluggish under these conditions. Their muscles would scream, their vision would darken, their instincts would panic. But Leo felt fine. His body wasn't reacting with distress. It was adapting, adjusting, thriving. He could endure. But then another shift occurred. The oxygen levels plummeted further. Leo exhaled through his nose, keeping himself grounded, forcing himself not to react as the test reached its final phase. For nearly 3 full minutes, he sat there, still and composed, lungs adjusting, blood circulating, muscles primed before he started to lose vision, his body giving out as the test finally ended. Then, HSSSSSS. The oxygen surged back. Leo inhaled deeply, feeling the flood of air rejuvenate him instantly, as the chamber's mechanical voice confirmed. Cardiovascular and pulmonary test complete. For a moment, Leo remained still, breathing heavily until his body recovered, while the assistant remained stunned reading his data. Cardiovascular and pulmonary assessment. Lung capacity, superior. Cadet demonstrates an exceptionally high oxygen intake and efficient utilization, capable of prolonged exertion with minimal fatigue buildup. Blood oxygenation efficiency, exceptional. Rapid oxygen distribution throughout muscles and organs, allowing for quicker recovery and sustained peak performance. Lactic acid tolerance, high. Cadet's muscle endurance remains stable under lactic acid buildup, significantly delaying fatigue compared to standard recruits. Overall cardiovascular rating, excellent. Cadet possesses superior endurance potential, with physiological markers indicating elite stamina under high-intensity conditions. The machine had given Leo an excellent assessment, placing him at the top percentile amongst his peers for the few physical tests that had been performed. Leo stepped out of the biochamber, still adjusting to the lingering sensation of the previous tests when the assistant gestured for him to follow. "Come on, Sky Shard, you're not done yet, she said, walking briskly ahead. The next test is a little different. Less about brute force, more about precision. Leo fell in a step beside her, his body feeling lighter, refreshed from the oxygen surge but still tingling with the residual charge from the explosive strength test. As they moved down the pristine hallways, she glanced at him with mild curiosity. That muscle composition of yours was already weird, but something tells me your reflex test is going to be even more interesting. Leo raised an eyebrow. And why is that? She smirked. Let's just say people with high fast-twitch fibers tend to either be absolute freaks at this test, or they completely choke under the pressure. Leo didn't respond, but he was intrigued. Eventually, they arrived at a sealed chamber with reinforced transparent walls. Inside, the room was empty except for a raised circular platform at the center. Overhead, an intricate grid of thousands of fine nozzles lined the ceiling like an array of surgical instruments. All right, the assistant began, bringing up a holographic interface beside the chamber. This is the reflex testing chamber, and your task is simple. She pointed toward the ceiling. In a few moments, high-density mana-infused raindrops will begin to fall. Your goal is to slice them before they hit the ground. Leo frowned slightly, glancing at the nozzles above. Raindrops, the assistant grinned. Not normal ones. These are mana-dense spheres, heavier than water, and fast enough to mimic projectiles. The test is designed to analyze your reflexes, reaction speed, and precision down to the millisecond. She flicked her fingers over the interface. The system will adapt the raindrop pattern to your arm reach and weapon choice, ensuring everyone faces the same level of difficulty. A side panel slid open, revealing an array of weapons. Pick one. Leo didn't hesitate. He reached for a dagger, a weapon that felt familiar, natural, like an extension of his arm. The assistant nodded in approval. Good choice. Quick, lightweight, and perfect for close-range strikes. Leo entered the circular platform, gripping the dagger as the chamber sealed shut behind him. A mechanical voice echoed overhead. Reflex test initiating. The nozzles above shifted, realigning based on Leo's height, reach, and stance. Then, hiss, a single droplet formed and fell. Two-pack. Leo saw the raindrop fall from the ceiling, and for a brief second he panicked, wondering if he would miss it. However, the speed of the drop's descent was relatively slow, and in the end he was able to slice it off clean before it hit the ground. Two-pack. Two-pack. As soon as he sliced the first drop, two more fell from the ceiling around him, and after judging their trajectory, Leo found himself capable of slicing them both in one arc, which he did. The initial droplets fell in a steady rhythm, each one descending at a predictable pace. Leo barely had to move to slice them, his wrist flicking effortlessly as his dagger traced smooth arcs through the air. Two-pack, two-pack, two-pack. The sound of mana-dense spheres bursting into mist echoed softly in the chamber. Outside, the assistant observed with mild interest, her fingers tapping idly against her data slate. He's handling the beginner phase well, she muttered. But let's see how he fares when the difficulty ramps up. Inside the chamber, Leo remained focused, adjusting his stance as the mechanical voice announced. Phase 2. Increase speed and volume. And then, suddenly, the droplets coming down from the ceiling each second doubled, and then tripled. Leo's muscles tensed as a flurry of drops rained down from multiple angles, the pattern shifting unpredictably. What the hell? This is too much, he thought, as his eyes darted in all directions trying to process the most optimal pathway to cut all the droplets. His movements sharpened, adapting on instinct as his dagger weaved through the air like an extension of his will. The challenge was evident. The raindrops weren't falling at uniform intervals anymore. Some plummeted faster, others slower, their trajectories crisscrossing in chaotic, misleading arcs. He felt his breathing quickening, his pulse thumping against his skin, but he was still in control. Outside, the assistant's expression shifted slightly as Leo kept up with the second stage without missing a single drop. Most first-year recruits faltered at this stage, missing a few droplets as they struggled to track the erratic movement. But Leo, he was seamless. His each strike was deliberate, precise, as if he could see the droplets before they even formed. But just as it looked like he could keep up with Phase 2, the assistant pushed for the final phase. Phase 3, maximum speed. The machine declared as the chamber darkened slightly, the nozzles above shifting into a rapid cascade mode. This was a phase of sure failure, a phase where droplets were not released in a free fall, but shot out like cannons with varying velocity. It was a phase where students were expected to fail, as the goal was to see just how many drops they could slice, and not to see if they could continue holding on. However, unaware of this reality, Leo continued to struggle at the best of his abilities, as he simply did not allow a single droplet to hit the floor, as if his very life depended on it. Holy shit, this is too much. I can't. At this pace, I can't, Leo thought, as just when he felt like his body was being overwhelmed with information about droplets falling and how his physical movements could not keep up, his vision shifted, and suddenly, everything slowed down. The sensation was abrupt, but not unfamiliar. The world around him warped, time itself seeming to stretch as he watched each raindrop descend in perfect clarity. Suddenly, he could see them, all of them, their fall paths, their spin, the exact moment they would touch the floor, as if reality had unraveled itself for him to perceive. His body responded in kind. His grip adjusted. His arm moved before he even realized it. And from the outside, it was like watching a ghost move through a storm of silver streaks. Leo's blade danced. His movements weren't sharp, weren't rigid. They were fluid, effortless. To the assistant watching through the chamber's transparent walls, it didn't even look like he was slashing. It looked like the droplets were vanishing before they even reached his range. An impossible blur of precision, each movement wasting zero energy, the blade flowing from strike to strike in a seamless, continuous loop. What the assistant said, as she released the breath she did not even realize she was holding on to, as the data on her slate spiked past previous records. The reaction time counter-flashing red, unable to register in normal measurement. Leo's entire being was functioning in perfect sync. His eyes, his muscles, his breathing. It was like his body knew exactly what to do before his mind could even process it. Then, beep, the chamber abruptly powered down. Leo blinked as reality snapped back to normal speed, the world around him seeming too slow for a moment before stabilizing. The mechanical voice confirmed. Reflex test complete. Leo exhaled, lowering his dagger as the chamber door unsealed with a hiss. He felt extremely weak within seconds, as if all strength had suddenly left his body, as he began to cough and fall to his knees. Just like the first time when he used this unknown ability, the second time he activated it also left him in shambles, as just activating this ability, even for a few seconds, seemed to drain him of a considerable amount of his strength. Outside, the assistant kept staring at the results in complete disbelief. In all her career, she had never seen a student quite like Leo before, as the results he displayed were beyond extraordinary.